The night Leora Vale arrived at Ashbourne Manor, she had no illusions about what she was walking into. The frontier duchy was a fortress of silence and status, ruled by a man who valued order above all else. Duke Calder Ashbourne didn't tolerate disruption. He didn't tolerate weakness. And he certainly didn't tolerate women who refused to bow. But Leora hadn't come to bow. She'd come because suffocating drawing rooms and empty social rituals were slowly killing her spirit, and because she'd heard rumors of a place so rigid, so unyielding, that it might finally give her something real to push against. She had no idea she was about to break everything. If you want to see how a single act of defiance can shatter an empire of silence, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. The first rule of Ashbourne Manor was simple. Don't speak unless spoken to. The second rule was even simpler. Don't look Duke Ashbourne in the eye. Leora Vale broke both rules within her first hour. She'd arrived under cover of darkness, her travel cloak pulled tight against the biting wind that swept across the frontier plains. The estate rose from the barren landscape like a monument to isolation. Stone walls thick enough to withstand siege, windows narrow and dark, courtyards empty of anything soft or decorative. It was a place built to endure, not to welcome. Perfect. The steward who interviewed her was a gaunt man named Pritchard, whose face looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime around the turn of the century. He sat behind a scarred wooden desk in a cramped office that smelled of ledgers and lamp oil, examining the forged references she'd paid a small fortune to acquire. "You understand the position?" he asked without looking up. "Housemaid. General duties. Discretion required." "Discretion is not optional here, Miss." He squinted at the papers. "Gray. It is survival. His Grace does not tolerate gossip, idleness, or familiarity of any kind. You will perform your duties efficiently and invisibly. You will not speak to His Grace unless directly addressed. You will not question household protocol. You will not... Does he actually live here, or is he just a particularly rigid set of rules that occasionally wears a coat?" Pritchard's head snapped up. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his expression caught somewhere between shock and the beginning of a migraine. "I beg your pardon?" Leora kept her face carefully neutral. "I'm only asking because the list of restrictions is quite extensive. I want to make sure there's an actual person at the center of all this, and not just a very elaborate haunting." The steward's lips pressed into a bloodless line. "Miss Gray, if you are not serious about this position, I'm extremely serious." And she was. Serious enough to have left behind her family's estate in the southern provinces. Serious enough to have abandoned the endless parade of suitable suitors and carefully orchestrated social events that had been slowly smothering her for the past 3 years. "I simply prefer to understand the nature of my employment. Is the Duke difficult because he's exacting, or because he's impossible?" Pritchard set down the papers with the kind of deliberate care that suggested he was imagining setting down something much heavier, like a boulder, perhaps, directly on her head. "His Grace is particular. He values efficiency, silence, and competence. The household runs on strict schedule and stricter hierarchy. Those who cannot adapt do not remain long." "How long is not long?" "The last maid lasted 4 days." "What happened?" "She cried during breakfast service. His Grace found it disruptive." Leora blinked. "She cried, and he fired her?" "She cried loudly. There is a difference." Pritchard picked up a pen, dipped it in ink with mechanical precision. "The position pays well precisely because it is demanding. You will have Sundays off, meals provided, and a private room in the servants' wing. In exchange, you will maintain absolute professionalism at all times. No tears, no hysterics. No questions about His Grace's personal affairs or preferences. And absolutely no unnecessary conversation." Define unnecessary. "Any conversation not directly related to your immediate duties. So if the kitchen is on fire, I can mention it, but if I notice the roof is leaking, that's more of a judgment call?" Pritchard's eye twitched. "Miss Gray, I'll take the position." Leora stood, smoothing down her plain wool dress. "When do I start?" The steward looked at her for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether hiring her would be a minor mistake or a catastrophic one. Finally, he sighed. "Immediately. Mrs. Kellen will show you to your quarters and explain your duties. Remember, discretion, efficiency, silence. His Grace breakfasts at 6, works in his study until noon, rides the estate perimeter after lunch, and dines alone at 8. You will not encounter him if you perform your duties correctly. And if I perform them incorrectly, you'll encounter him once, briefly. Duh. Mrs. Kellen turned out to be a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had survived approximately 400 winters on the frontier and wasn't about to let a soft city girl ruin her track record. You'll be responsible for the East Wing, she said, leading Leora through a series of cold stone corridors, second and third floors, and third. Dusting, sweeping, maintaining the fireplaces, changing linens, polishing anything that looks like it might tarnish. His Grace is particular about tarnish. So I've heard. Is he particular about anything else? Mrs. Kellen shot her a look. Everything. His books must be alphabetized by author, then by publication date. His desk must be cleared every evening, papers stacked by priority, urgent left, routine right. His riding boots must be cleaned and oiled after every use, placed at exactly a 45-degree angle to the door. His tea must be, let me guess, a specific temperature, specific leaves, specific cup, specific spoon, specific... You think you're clever, girl? Leora smiled. I think I'm exhausted, underpaid, and possibly making a terrible decision. But clever? That's generous. To her surprise, Mrs. Kellen's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. You've got spine. That's good. You'll need it. She stopped in front of a plain wooden door. This is you. Unpack quickly. You start in 20 minutes. The room was small but clean, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single window that looked out over the eastern plains. Leora set down her traveling bag and moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. The frontier stretched endlessly in every direction, all brutal wind and unforgiving sky. No softness, no compromise, just raw existence, stripped of pretense. She'd never felt more at home. But she made it 6 hours before she saw him. It happened in the library, a massive room on the third floor, all dark wood and leather and the smell of old paper. Leora had been dusting the upper shelves, balanced precariously on a ladder, when she heard footsteps in the corridor, heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that didn't ask permission. She froze, cloth in hand, as the door opened. Duke Calder Ashbourne walked into his own library like he was entering a battlefield, shoulders squared, expression locked somewhere between calculation and controlled irritation. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes the color of winter steel. He wore riding clothes, mud still clinging to his boots, and carried himself with the kind of rigid self-possession that came from years of never being challenged. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence at all, just moved to his desk, pulled out a ledger, and began writing with sharp, angry strokes. Leora should have stayed silent, should have continued her work invisibly, exactly as instructed. Instead, she said, "You're going to track mud across the carpet." The scratching of the pen stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that Leora could hear her own heartbeat. Slowly, with the deliberate care of a man who was used to people flinching when he moved, Duke Ashbourne raised his head. His eyes found hers. "Excuse me?" His voice was low, controlled, and colder than the wind outside. It was the voice of a man who had never been contradicted by a servant, who had possibly never been contradicted by anyone. Leora climbed down from the ladder, setting the cloth aside with careful precision. "Your boots, they're muddy." "You're tracking it across the carpet I just cleaned." For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then his gaze dropped to his boots, to the faint trail of dried mud he'd left across the ornate rug. When he looked back at her, something dangerous flickered in his expression. "Who are you?" "The new housemaid." "Name?" "Leora Gray." "How long have you been employed here, Miss Gray?" 6 hours. "I see." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "And in those 6 hours, did anyone happen to mention that servants do not address me directly?" "They mentioned it. Multiple times, actually. Very thoroughly. Yet you chose to ignore that instruction." "I chose to prioritize the carpet." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The carpet." "Yes, it's a very nice carpet. Expensive, I'd imagine. And you were actively destroying it." "I was walking across my own library in my own house." "Yes, with muddy boots, which is why I mentioned it." The silence stretched. Leora could feel her pulse hammering, but she kept her expression calm. She'd learned long ago that the worst thing you could do with a bully, whether titled or not, was show fear. Duke Ashbourne stood slowly, his full height suddenly imposing in the book-lined space. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than she'd expected, and he moved with the controlled precision of someone who had trained extensively in combat. He crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Let me be very clear, Miss Gray. I do not tolerate insubordination. I do not tolerate impertinence. And I especially do not tolerate servants who think they are entitled to lecture me about my own habits in my own home." "I wasn't lecturing. I was informing." "The distinction," he said coldly, "is irrelevant." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, one is helpful and the other is condescending. I was trying to be helpful." "By criticizing me? By pointing out a problem you might not have noticed. You're welcome, by the way." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're dismissed." "From the library or from the position?" "Both." Leora felt a flash of genuine anger cut through her amusement. "Because I asked you not to track mud everywhere. That seems excessive." "Well, because you lack the basic respect required to function in a structured household." "No," she said quietly. "I have plenty of respect. I just reserve it for people who've earned it." The air between them went very, very still. For a long moment, Duke Ashbourne said nothing. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been surprise or might have been rage. Then he turned on his heel and walked to the door. "You have until morning to vacate the premises." He left without another word, his muddy boots leaving tracks all the way to the corridor. Puak. Leora didn't pack. Instead, she finished cleaning the library, scrubbed the mud from the carpet with grim determination, and went to bed in her narrow room with the window open to the freezing night air. If Duke Calder Ashbourne thought he could intimidate her into compliance after 6 hours, he had severely underestimated both her stubbornness and her lack of better options. She'd left everything behind to come here. Her family, her name, the suffocating weight of expectation that came with being Leora Vale, daughter of a minor but ambitious southern lord who'd spent 20 years trying to marry her off to someone important. She wasn't going back to that, not for a duke with a mud problem and an authority complex. So when morning came and Mrs. Kellen appeared at her door with an expression of grim resignation, Leora was already dressed and ready. "His Grace wants to see you in his study." "To escort me out personally? That seems inefficient." Mrs. Kellen's mouth twitched. "Just try not to make it worse." "I don't make things worse. I simply refuse to make them artificially better." "That," the older woman said tiredly, "is exactly the same thing." Well, Duke Ashbourne's study was exactly what Leora expected. Severe, organized, devoid of anything resembling comfort or personality. The desk was massive and empty except for 3 perfectly stacked piles of correspondence. The chairs were hard-backed. The curtains were drawn against the morning light. The Duke himself stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, expression carved from granite. "Miss Gray?" "Your Grace." She kept her tone neutral. "Mrs. Kellen informs me that you did not pack last night." "That's correct." "May I ask why?" "Because I don't accept the dismissal." His eyebrows rose a fraction. "You don't accept it?" "No." "I'm afraid that's not how employment works." "Isn't it? You hired me to maintain the East Wing efficiently and discreetly. I've done exactly that. The library is spotless, by the way. The carpet looks brand new. You also directly challenged me in a manner that no servant in this household has ever, then maybe they should have. Because, I'm sorry, but tracking mud across an expensive carpet and then getting angry when someone points it out isn't ducal authority. It's just stubbornness." "Stubbornness." "Yes, childish stubbornness. And I say that with respect." "You have a very unusual definition of respect." "I have a very consistent definition of respect. It means treating people like they're capable of handling the truth, not like they're fragile ornaments that might shatter if you speak plainly." Duke Ashbourne moved around the desk slowly, his expression carefully controlled. "You seem to labor under the misapprehension that your opinion matters to me. It doesn't have to matter. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm trying to do my job." "Your job is to follow instructions." My job, Leora corrected, is to maintain the East Wing, which I will do efficiently, discreetly, and without tracking mud anywhere. In exchange, you pay me. That's the arrangement. What happened yesterday was incidental. Incidental? Yes. You were about to ruin a carpet. I mentioned it. You overreacted. It happens. The muscle in his jaw tightened. I did not overreact. You fired me for pointing out a factual observation. That's pretty much the definition of overreacting. I fired you for insubordination. You fired me for honesty. There's a difference. He stared at her for a long, dangerous moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. You are either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both, but I'm also the most thorough cleaner you're going to find on this frontier, and I don't cry during breakfast service. So you can fire me if you want, but you'll be making a mistake. Silence. Duke Ashbourne walked to the window, hands still clasped behind his back, and stared out at the empty plains. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost thoughtful. Why are you really here, Miss Grey? Women with your education, your manner of speaking, you're not from the servant class. You're slumming for reasons you haven't disclosed. Leora's stomach tightened. My background isn't relevant. It is if you're hiding from something or someone. I'm not hiding. I'm escaping. From what? A life that was slowly suffocating me. The words came out sharper than she intended. A life of empty rituals and false courtesies and men who smile while they lie. I came here because I heard the frontier was honest. Brutal, maybe. Harsh, definitely. But honest. He turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. And is it? What you expected? Yes, she said simply. Exactly. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the cold study. Then Duke Ashbourne moved back to his desk and sat down with controlled precision. You may stay. On a trial basis. 1 month. If you can manage to perform your duties without... He paused, clearly searching for the right word. Without challenging me at every opportunity, we'll discuss making the arrangement permanent. And if I can't? Then you'll leave, quietly, without protest. Leora considered this. I can agree to that, with one condition. His eyes narrowed dangerously. You're negotiating? I'm clarifying. I'll perform my duties without unnecessary challenges. But if I see you about to do something genuinely stupid, like setting yourself on fire, or falling downstairs, or tracking mud across expensive carpets, I'm going to mention it. Because letting your employer destroy things through carelessness isn't discretion. It's negligence. I don't set myself on fire. Then we shouldn't have any problems. Duke Ashbourne stared at her for another long moment. Then he picked up his pen and returned to his correspondence with deliberate focus. Dismissed, Miss Grey. Thank you, Your Grace. She was almost to the door when his voice stopped her. And Miss Grey? Yes? The carpet did look brand new, thank you. She turned back, surprised, but he was already bent over his paperwork, his expression locked back into its usual severe lines. Leora smiled and closed the door softly behind her. Jeb. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that was part routine, part chess match. Leora kept to her duties with meticulous care. The East Wing gleamed, the fireplaces were always ready, the linens were crisp and perfectly folded. She learned the Duke's schedules, his habits, the subtle cues that indicated his mood, and she learned to navigate the complex, brutal hierarchy of Ashbourne Manor. The household staff numbered about 20, a mix of groundskeepers, stable hands, kitchen workers, and house servants. They ranged from Mrs. Kellen, who'd been with the Duke since he inherited the estate, to young Tommy in the stables who was barely 14 and terrified of everything. What struck Leora most wasn't the strictness of the rules, but the cruelty embedded in their enforcement. The upper servants, Pritchard especially, but also the Duke's valet Simmons and the head housekeeper Miss Crawford, ruled with casual viciousness. Mistakes were punished with public humiliation. Weakness was exploited. The younger, lower-ranked staff lived in constant fear of dismissal, or worse. Duke Ashbourne allowed it all. Not through active participation, but through deliberate ignorance. He'd created a system and then refused to see its consequences. It took Leora 3 weeks to realize he genuinely didn't know, and another week to decide she was going to tell him. The opportunity came on a bitter afternoon in early winter. Leora was in the servants' hall, folding linens, when she heard crying from the kitchen passage. She found Annie, a kitchen maid barely 16, huddled against the wall, her face blotchy and red, her wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. "What happened?" Annie flinched. Nothing, miss. I'm fine." Your wrist is broken. That's not fine." Leora knelt down beside her. "Who did this?" I dropped a pan. Mr. Simmons said I was clumsy, and he grabbed my arm to demonstrate proper handling technique, and rage, white hot and immediate, flooded through Leora's chest. "Where is he now? Please don't. He'll fire me if he knows I told—" "He'll fire you? Annie, he assaulted you. He was just showing me—" "He broke your wrist. That's not instruction. That's violence." But Annie was already shaking her head, terror plain in her eyes. "Please, Miss Gray, I need this position. My family needs the wages. If I complain, if I cause trouble—" "You didn't cause anything. He did." But even as she said it, Leora knew it wouldn't matter. Not here, not in a system where the powerful could do whatever they wanted as long as they maintained the appearance of order. She helped Annie to her feet gently. "Come on, we're getting that wrist wrapped, and then you're going to rest. I'll handle your duties today." "You can't. You have your own." "I'll handle it. Don't argue." By the time Leora had gotten Annie settled and finished both their duties, it was past 8. The household had gone quiet, most of the staff already in their quarters. She should have gone to bed. Instead, she went to find Duke Ashbourne. She found him in the library, as expected, working by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his features. "Miss Gray? It's late." "I know. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to report an incident." His expression shifted immediately to cool attention. "What kind of incident?" "Your valet broke Annie's wrist this afternoon." Silence. Duke Ashbourne set down his pen very carefully. "Explain." Leora laid out what had happened, keeping her tone factual despite the anger still simmering in her chest. When she finished, the Duke's expression was unreadable. "Did Annie file a complaint?" "No, she's terrified she'll be dismissed." "Then how do you know it wasn't an accident?" "Because I've watched Simmons operate for 3 weeks now. He rules through intimidation. So does Pritchard. So does Miss Crawford. They've created a system where the staff are too afraid to complain, so they get away with—" "That's enough." Leora stopped, stung. Duke Ashbourne stood, moving to the window with his hands clasped behind his back, his usual position when he wanted to think. "You're making serious accusations, Miss Gray." "I'm reporting what happened. Based on the word of a junior servant who, by your own admission, hasn't filed an official complaint." "Because she's afraid to." "Or because she's exaggerating an accident to gain sympathy." Leora stared at him, genuine shock cutting through her anger. "You can't actually believe that." "I believe that running a household requires firm management. Sometimes discipline appears harsh to those unfamiliar with—" "Discipline? He broke her wrist." "You don't know that. You weren't there. I saw the aftermath. I saw her fear. Fear of consequences for her own carelessness, perhaps." Something cold settled in Leora's chest. She'd known he was rigid, controlled, emotionally distant, but she hadn't realized he was willfully blind. "You really don't see it," she said quietly. "See what?" "What you've created here. You set up rules so strict that the only way to enforce them is through fear, and then you insulated yourself so completely that you don't have to watch the enforcement happen. You just get to live in your ordered, silent world while people like Annie get hurt." His shoulders stiffened. "I've created an efficient household. If my staff can't meet basic standards, your standards aren't the problem. Your willingness to ignore how they're being enforced is." Duke Ashbourne turned slowly, his expression hardening. "You're overstepping, Miss Gray." "Am I? Because yesterday you thanked me for pointing out something you'd missed, but apparently that only counts when it's about carpets, not people." "That's not—" "You hired me because I'm thorough, because I notice things. Well, I'm noticing that your household is run on cruelty, and you're choosing not to care because acknowledging it would be inconvenient." The air in the library went dangerously still. When Duke Ashbourne spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze. "You've been here less than a month. You know nothing about running an estate of this size, managing staff, maintaining order in an environment this harsh. You think you can walk in here with your southern sensibilities and your moral superiority and lecture me about... I'm not lecturing you. I'm asking you to open your eyes. I'm asking you to remember your place. My place? My place is as a servant in your household, and from where I'm standing, I have a better view of what's actually happening than you do from your study. His jaw clenched. Get out. Your Grace, get out, now, before I forget myself entirely. Leora held his gaze for another long moment. Then she turned and left, her hands shaking with fury she refused to let him see. Behind her, she heard something hit the wall, probably a book, and the sound of harsh, ragged breathing. She'd crossed a line. She knew it. She just wasn't sure she cared. She expected to be dismissed the next morning. Instead, Duke Ashbourne was simply gone. Rode out before dawn, Mrs. Kellen reported at breakfast. Didn't say where. Didn't say when he'd be back. The household seemed to exhale in his absence. The upper servants relaxed their stranglehold. Conversations happened at normal volumes. Even Pritchard looked marginally less severe. Leora used the time to quietly check on Annie. Her wrist was splinted and healing, though she still flinched whenever footsteps approached, and to observe the household dynamics more carefully. What she found confirmed everything she'd suspected. Without the Duke's presence, the staff's true hierarchy emerged. The brutal enforcement eased. People helped each other, laughed even. Tommy in the stables whistled while he worked. It was almost pleasant. Duke Ashbourne returned 3 days later, riding in just before sunset. Leora watched from an upper window as he dismounted, his movements sharp and controlled, his expression darker than usual. He disappeared into his study and didn't emerge. Leora finished her duties, returned to her room, and tried to sleep. She was almost successful when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Then a knock. She opened the door to find Duke Ashbourne standing in the hallway, still in his riding clothes, his hair disheveled, his expression raw in a way she'd never seen. I went to the village, he said without preamble. Spoke to the physician. He confirmed Annie's injury was consistent with forceful gripping, not an accident. Leora said nothing. I also spoke to several former staff members. They told me things I should have known, things I should have seen. Still, she waited. Duke Ashbourne ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically uncontrolled that Leora felt something shift in her chest. You were right, he said quietly, about all of it. I created a system and then refused to look at what it became. That's unforgivable. What are you going to do about it? I've dismissed Simmons. Pritchard is on notice. Miss Crawford will be reassigned to less supervisory duties. And I'm implementing new protocols for staff complaints. Direct to me, bypassing the chain of command. Leora leaned against the doorframe, studying him. Why are you telling me this? Because you were brave enough to tell me the truth when everyone else was too afraid. And because... He paused, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. Because I think I've been half asleep for years, and you woke me up, rather forcefully. Despite everything, Leora smiled. I do have a tendency to be forceful. It's not a tendency, it's a defining characteristic. Should I apologize? Absolutely not. He met her eyes directly, and for the first time she saw something genuine there, something almost human. Don't ever apologize for being honest, especially when it's uncomfortable. They stood there in the dim corridor, the household silent around them, and Leora felt the air shift into something new, something undefined but undeniably present. I should let you sleep, Duke Ashbourne said finally. Probably. He didn't move. Neither did she. Miss Gray, Leora, He stopped, clearly struggling with words. Thank you for not letting me stay blind. You're welcome, Your Grace. Calder. The name came out rough. When we're alone, you don't have to use titles. Leora's heart did something complicated in her chest. All right, Calder. The way his expression shifted when she said his name, like something locked had finally opened, would stay with her for days. He left without another word, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Leora closed her door and leaned against it, her pulse racing, her mind spinning. She'd come to the frontier looking for something real. She had the distinct feeling she'd just found it, and it terrified her more than anything ever had. The changes started small. Calder, she still stumbled over using his given name, even in her own thoughts, began appearing in places he'd never been seen before. The kitchens, the stables, the servants' hall during the evening meal. He didn't announce his presence, didn't make speeches, just observed with those winter steel eyes, watching how the household actually functioned when he wasn't locked in his study. The staff didn't know what to make of it. He stood there for 10 minutes yesterday, Annie whispered to Leora one morning while they folded linens. Her wrist was healing well, though she still favored it. Just watching Mr. Pritchard assign duties, didn't say a word. Pritchard looked ready to faint. Good, Leora said flatly. You're not worried about what people are saying? What are they saying? Annie glanced around nervously before leaning closer. That you've bewitched him. That you've got some kind of hold over his grace. Miss Crawford said, Miss Crawford, Leora interrupted calmly, is bitter because she got demoted for screaming at Tommy so loudly he threw up in the garden. Her opinion is irrelevant. But people are talking about you, about how his grace looks at you. Leora's hand stilled on the linen. How does he look at me? Like, Annie struggled for words. Like you're a puzzle he's trying to solve. Or like you're the only real thing in the room. I don't know. It's unsettling. It was unsettling. Leora had noticed it too. The way his attention would catch on her when she entered a room, the way conversations would pause mid-sentence when their eyes met. Something had shifted that night in the corridor, and neither of them seemed to know what to do with it. So they did what they did best. They argued. You're doing it wrong, Leora said 3 weeks after Simmons' dismissal, watching Calder attempt to saddle his own horse in the stable yard. He looked up sharply. I've been saddling horses since I was 6. Then you've been doing it wrong for almost 30 years. The girth is too loose. He's going to throw you halfway across the estate. He's not going to... The stallion, a massive black beast named Nero, chose that moment to shift his weight and nearly step on Calder's foot. Calder swore under his breath and yanked the girth tighter with more force than finesse. Leora sighed and walked over. May I? You know how to saddle a horse? My father bred them. I practically lived in our stables. She gestured for him to move aside. Watch, you're pulling straight down. You need to angle it slightly forward, let him exhale first, then tighten gradually. Otherwise he'll just puff out his belly and you'll end up on the ground later. She demonstrated, her movements practiced and sure. Nero snorted but stood still, clearly recognizing competence when he felt it. Calder watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Where did you say you were from? He asked quietly. Leora's hands faltered for just a fraction of a second. I didn't. No, you haven't. In 6 weeks, you've told me almost nothing about yourself. There's nothing to tell. Leora, you're all set. She stepped back, brushing hay from her skirt. Try not to fall off. She turned to leave, but his hand caught her wrist, gently, nothing like how Simmons had grabbed Annie, but firm enough to stop her. Why won't you tell me? Because it doesn't matter. It matters to me. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face. The early morning light caught the silver in his hair, made his features seem less harsh somehow, more human. Let go, Calder. He released her immediately, stepping back. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have grabbed me, no. But you should also stop looking at me like I'm some kind of mystery you're entitled to solve. I work here. That's all you need to know. That's not all He stopped himself, jaw tightening. You're right. I apologize. Leora felt something twist in her chest. Guilt, maybe, or regret. My father is a lord in the southern provinces. He spent 20 years trying to marry me off to anyone with a title and a pulse. I got tired of pretending to be interested in men who saw me as property, so I left. That's the whole story. Calder stared at her. You left your entire life behind to work as a housemaid? I left my entire life behind to be a person instead of a decorative object. The housemaid part was just available. And if your father finds you? He won't. I covered my tracks well. And besides, he's probably relieved I'm gone. One less daughter to auction off at social functions. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Calder was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He's a fool." "What?" "Your father. He's a fool. If he couldn't see that you're worth more than a title and a marriage contract, he's blind and stupid and doesn't deserve you." The words hit Leora like a physical blow, not because they were flowery or romantic, but because they were said with such absolute conviction. Like he genuinely couldn't comprehend any other reality. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once, then swung up into the saddle with practiced ease. Nero shifted but held steady. The girth was perfect. "Leora?" She looked up at him, silhouetted against the pale morning sky. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Even if you do criticize my horse care and lecture me about my household management, and generally make me question everything I thought I knew about running an estate." Despite everything, she smiled. "That's the nicest insult I've ever received. I'm learning from the best." He rode off before she could respond, but she stood in the stable yard long after he'd disappeared, her heart doing complicated things she absolutely refused to examine too closely. The trouble started with Lady Cressida Hartley. She arrived on a bitter afternoon in late autumn, traveling in a gilded carriage with an entourage of 6, all silk and superiority and barely concealed disdain for the frontier. Leora was polishing the main hall when the carriage pulled up. Through the window, she watched a woman emerge, tall, elegant, wrapped in furs that probably cost more than the entire household's annual wages combined. "That's Lady Hartley," Mrs. Kellen said quietly, appearing at Leora's elbow. "Old family friend. Visits twice a year, whether His Grace wants her to or not." "Does he want her to?" "Hard to say. His Grace doesn't want much of anything, as far as I can tell, except order and silence." Lady Hartley swept into the manor like she owned it, her sharp eyes taking in every detail with obvious judgment. She was beautiful in the way wealthy people often were, carefully maintained, expensively dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Calder!" Her voice rang through the hall. "Still hiding in this freezing wasteland, I see. When are you going to stop punishing yourself and return to civilization?" Calder emerged from his study, his expression locked into polite neutrality. "Cressida, this is unexpected. I sent word 3 weeks ago." "I didn't receive it." "Because you never read your correspondence. Honestly, you're becoming more hermit than duke." She air-kissed him on both cheeks, her gaze already scanning the room. "Though I see you've at least hired some new staff. That's progress." Her eyes landed on Leora, who was still holding the polishing cloth, frozen in place. "You there, girl. Have my luggage taken to the blue guest room, and tell the kitchen I'll need tea immediately. Something decent, not frontier swill." Oh, Leora felt her spine stiffen. "The blue guest room hasn't been prepared for visitors. If you'd sent word ahead—" "I did send word. To Calder, who apparently doesn't read his letters. Surely that's not my fault." Cressida's smile was sharp. "Now, run along. I'm sure you have many important dusting duties to attend to." "Cressida," Calder said quietly, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Miss Gray is correct. We weren't expecting guests. If you'd waited in the—" "Oh, Calder, don't be tiresome. I've been traveling for days. I'm not going to wait in the parlor like some supplicant." She turned back to Leora, her expression cooling. "The room, the tea, now." For a moment, Leora seriously considered telling Lady Cressida Hartley exactly where she could put her tea in her entitled attitude. But she caught Calder's eye, saw the tension in his jaw, and realized this was a test. Not for her, for him. So she smiled pleasantly and inclined her head. "Of course, my lady. Right away." She left before she could see Calder's reaction, her hands clenched around the polishing cloth, hard enough to hurt. The blue guest room was freezing, dusty, and completely unprepared for occupancy. Leora threw open the windows to air it out, then hunted down fresh linens while muttering a string of profanity that would have scandalized her mother. Mrs. Kellen found her 20 minutes later, arms full of blankets, face flushed with exertion and anger. "Don't let her get to you," the older woman said. "I'm not letting her get to me. I'm simply preparing a room for an unexpected guest who has the manners of a spoiled child. She's nobility. She expects to be accommodated. She's rude. There's a difference." Leora yanked a blanket onto the bed with more force than necessary. Who is she anyway? Besides someone with too much money and not enough sense? Mrs. Kellen hesitated. She and His Grace were Close, years ago. There was talk of an engagement. Leora's hands stilled. What happened? His Grace inherited the duchy unexpectedly when his brother died, chose to move out here to the frontier instead of staying in the capital. Lady Hartley didn't approve. She wanted a duke who attended court functions and social events, not one who preferred ledgers and silence. So she left? He left first. She's been trying to change his mind ever since. Something cold settled in Leora's stomach. I see. Don't read too much into it. His Grace has never shown interest in rekindling anything. Lady Hartley just refuses to accept reality. But as Leora finished preparing the room and headed down to arrange tea, she couldn't shake the image of Cressida Hartley looking at Calder like he was something she'd mislaid and fully intended to reclaim. Dinner that night was excruciating. Leora wasn't supposed to be there. Her duties didn't include formal service, but Pritchard had pulled her in at the last minute when one of the regular servers called in sick. So she stood against the wall in the formal dining room, maintaining perfect servant invisibility, while Lady Hartley held court. The capital is divine this season, Cressida said, delicately cutting her venison. The opera alone is worth the trip. Though I suppose opera isn't much priority when one spends all one's time managing grain yields and livestock inventories. The estate is productive, Calder said mildly. That requires attention. It requires an overseer, darling, not a duke. She sipped her wine. You're wasting yourself out here. You could be influential, powerful. Instead, you're playing farmer in the middle of nowhere. I prefer it here. Because you're hiding. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Calder set down his fork with careful precision. I'm not hiding. Aren't you? You inherited a duchy, Calder. Responsibilities. A legacy. And you ran to the frontier like a wounded animal going to ground. I came here because the estate needed proper management. Because I valued productivity over what? Society? Civilization? Me? The last word hung in the air like a challenge. Calder's jaw tightened. Cressida, I've waited 5 years, Calder. 5 years of you pretending this exile is noble instead of cowardly. When are you going to stop punishing yourself for Michael's death and return to the life you were meant to have? Leora's breath caught. She shouldn't be hearing this. This was private, painful, clearly a wound that hadn't healed. But she couldn't leave without drawing attention, so she stood frozen while Calder's face went completely blank. Michael's death has nothing to do with my decision to manage this estate. It has everything to do with it. You feel guilty because you survived and he didn't, because you inherited when he was supposed to. So you came out here to suffer in the cold and convince yourself that hardship equals atonement. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I knew you, Calder, before, when you laughed and attended functions and actually seemed to enjoy being alive. Now you're just empty, going through motions. And for what? So you can feel like you've earned something through suffering? Calder stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. It's not over. It's been delayed for 5 years while you played hermit. But we're going to have it, Calder, because I'm not leaving this time without an answer. An answer to what? To whether you're ever coming back. To civilization. To your real life. To me. Silence. Leora felt like an intruder in the worst possible way. This was intimate, raw, nothing a servant should witness, but Calder's eyes found hers across the room, and something in his expression shifted, hardened. No, he said quietly. I'm not. Cressida's perfectly composed face cracked slightly. What? I'm not coming back. This is my life now. This estate, this work, this... He gestured vaguely at the room, the house, the harsh land beyond the windows. This is what I choose. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Because of guilt? Because you think you owe Michael some kind of... Because I'm better here. The words came out sharp. Because in the capital, I was suffocating under expectations and social performances and people who valued titles more than truth. Here, at least the hardship is honest. Cressida stood slowly, her expression icing over. And what about us? There is no us. There hasn't been for 5 years. There could be. If you just... I don't want there to be. Calder's voice was flat, final. I'm sorry, Cressida, But I don't love you. I probably never did. And coming out here made me realize that a life built on obligation and social expectation isn't a life I'm willing to live. The words fell like stones. Cressida's face went white, then red. You're choosing this frozen wasteland over me? I'm choosing honesty over performance. There's a difference. Honesty? She laughed, sharp and bitter. You wouldn't know honesty if it kicked you in the teeth. You're just running, Calder, from responsibility, from expectations, from anything real. This is real. This is cowardice. Calder's expression went very still. I think you should leave. Oh, I'm leaving, but not because you're asking, because I'm done waiting for you to remember who you actually are. Cressida threw her napkin on the table. Enjoy your exile, your grace. I hope the grain yields and livestock inventories keep you warm at night. She swept from the room, her skirts rustling like angry waves. The door slammed. Leora stood against the wall, barely breathing, unsure whether she should leave or stay or spontaneously combust. Calder sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. You can stop pretending you're not there, he said quietly. Leora stepped forward hesitantly. I'm sorry, Pritchard assigned me to... I know, it's fine. He looked up at her, his expression raw in a way she'd never seen. How much did you hear? Enough to know that Lady Hartley is terrible at accepting rejection. Despite everything, he almost smiled. She always has been. And enough to know that you lost your brother. I'm sorry. That must have been... She stopped, unsure how to finish. Devastating? Guilt-inducing? The reason I fled to the frontier like a coward? I was going to say painful, and I don't think you're a coward. He looked at her steadily. Why not? Cressida does. Most of society does. I had responsibilities in the capital, a title, expectations. I abandoned all of it. You chose a different kind of responsibility. That's not cowardice. That's just different. Is it? Or am I just hiding from a life I couldn't handle? Leora moved closer, her voice firm. You're handling a duchy, managing an estate, employing 20 people, creating order from chaos in one of the harshest environments on the frontier. That's not hiding. That's work, real work, the kind that actually matters. Cressida would disagree. Cressida wants a decorative husband to parade at social functions. You are never going to be that for her, brother or no brother. Calder studied her for a long moment. How do you know? Because I've watched you for 2 months now. You're not built for performance. You're built for truth, even when it's uncomfortable. She paused. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Something shifted in his expression. That sounds familiar. I learned from observation. Did you? Yes. From a very rigid, very stubborn duke who insisted on tracking mud everywhere until someone pointed out he was being ridiculous. This time he did smile, small and genuine. I've improved. You've grown. There's a difference. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things neither of them was ready to name. Leora... A commotion erupted from the entrance hall, raised voices, the sound of luggage being moved. Calder sighed. She's leaving now, apparently. Good riddance. Should I be offended on her behalf? Only if you want me to be offended on your behalf for her calling you a coward. He stood, something lighter in his expression than she'd seen in weeks. Fair point. Thank you. For what? For being honest. Especially when it's uncomfortable. He left before she could respond, moving toward the chaos in the entrance hall. Leora stood alone in the dining room, her heart racing, her mind spinning with all the things she hadn't said. She was in trouble. Deep, complicated, absolutely inappropriate trouble. And she had no idea what to do about it. Lady Hartley left in a fury of silk and barely suppressed rage, her carriage disappearing into the night with all the drama of a poorly written stage exit. The household exhaled collectively. But the peace didn't last long. 2 days after Cressida's departure, a rider arrived from the eastern border with news that changed everything. Leora was in the library when she heard the commotion, rapid footsteps, urgent voices, Calder's study door slamming open. She shouldn't have listened. She listened anyway, pressing herself against the wall near the connecting door. Attacked 3 homesteads in the past week, the messenger was saying, his voice tight with fear. Burned crops, scattered livestock, the families barely escaped. Bandits? Calder's voice was sharp. Organized ones, at least 20 men, maybe more. They're moving west, hitting anything remote enough to avoid military response. And the garrison? 2 days' ride south. By the time they mobilize, the raiders will be gone. Silence. Then Calder. How many homesteads are in their path? At least a dozen. Mostly single families. Farmers, craftsmen. They can't defend themselves. Then we bring them here. Your Grace? Send riders. Every homestead between here and the eastern border. Tell them to evacuate to Ashbourne Manor. We have space, supplies. We can shelter them until the garrison arrives. But, Your Grace, that could be 50 people, maybe more. Then we'll make room for 50 people. Send the riders. Now. Footsteps retreated. A door closed. Leora stood frozen against the wall, her mind racing. 50 refugees. Frightened, displaced, probably arriving with nothing but what they could carry. The household was barely prepared for regular operation. This would be chaos. She found Calder still in his study, staring at maps spread across his desk. You're going to need help, she said without preamble. He looked up, unsurprised to see her. You were listening. The whole household was listening. Sound travels. Fair point. He turned back to the maps. Mrs. Kellen is already organizing the guest wings. Pritchard is inventorying supplies. We have enough food for 2 weeks if we ration carefully. What about medical supplies? If people are fleeing raids, there will be injuries. Calder's jaw tightened. I hadn't thought of that. I'll make a list. Send someone to the village for whatever we don't have. She moved closer to the desk. What about security? I'm riding out with the groundskeepers tomorrow. We'll establish a perimeter watch, create evacuation protocols in case the raiders turn this direction. You're going yourself? I'm not sending my people into danger without being willing to face it myself. Of course he wasn't, because for all his rigidity and emotional distance, Calder Ashbourne was fundamentally honorable. It was infuriating and admirable in equal measure. I'm coming with you, Leora said. Absolutely not. I can ride, I can shoot, and I'm better at assessing defensive positions than most of your groundskeepers combined. How do you know? He stopped. Your father's estate. You learned there. My father was paranoid about raids, made all his children learn basic defense. I'm rusty, but I remember the fundamentals. Calder studied her, clearly torn between practicality and protectiveness. It's dangerous. So is sheltering 50 refugees in the path of organized raiders. We're all in danger now. I might as well be useful. He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then he nodded once. We leave at dawn. The refugees started arriving the next afternoon, families with wagons piled high with whatever they'd managed to save, children clutching toys and blankets, faces tight with fear and exhaustion. The household mobilized with surprising efficiency. Mrs. Kellen directed sleeping arrangements. The kitchen staff prepared simple but hearty meals. Pritchard, for all his flaws, proved excellent at organizing chaos into manageable systems. And Leora found herself moving between groups, translating Calder's orders into compassionate action. His Grace says you'll be sleeping in the East Wing became, let's get you somewhere warm where the children can rest. Supplies are rationed became, we'll make sure everyone eats, don't worry. By evening, the manor was crowded, noisy, and completely transformed. Calder hated it. Leora could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched every time someone spoke too loudly or a child ran past. This was his worst nightmare: chaos, disruption, loss of control. But he never showed it, never complained, just kept working, organizing, ensuring everyone had what they needed. She found him after midnight in his study, surrounded by supply inventories and defensive maps. You should sleep, she said. Can't, too much to coordinate. Calder, if I miscalculate food supplies, people starve. If I position the watch wrong, people die. I can't afford to sleep. Leora walked over and physically removed the pen from his hand. You also can't afford to collapse from exhaustion. You're no good to anyone unconscious. I'm fine. You're running on stubbornness and anxiety. That's not fine. He looked up at her, his expression raw with exhaustion. How do you do this? Do what? Function when everything is chaos. You thrive in it. I'm drowning. Leora pulled up a chair and sat across from him. Because I grew up in controlled chaos. Social events, political maneuvering, managing appearances. I learned to adapt or go insane. You grew up with order, rules, structure. This feels like failure to you because it's not neat. It is failure. I should be able to manage. You're managing 50 terrified refugees, organizing a defense against armed raiders, and keeping your entire household functional on limited supplies. That's not failure. That's leadership. It doesn't feel like leadership. It feels like barely controlled panic. Good leadership usually does. She reached across the desk and took his hand, a bold gesture that surprised them both. You're doing fine, Calder. Better than fine. These people feel safe because you made them feel safe. That matters more than perfect organization. His fingers tightened around hers. What if I can't protect them? Then we'll handle it together, but stop borrowing tragedy from the future. Focus on now. They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked across the cluttered desk, the manor settling into uneasy sleep around them. Then Calder said quietly, I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my house. You tracked mud across an expensive carpet. I'd say that's fairly catastrophic behavior deserving of cosmic punishment. He laughed, an actual genuine laugh that made her heart do complicated things. Get some sleep, she said, standing. We ride the perimeter at dawn. We? Yes, we. Don't argue. She left before he could protest, her hand still tingling from where he'd held it. She was definitely in trouble. The raid came 3 nights later. Leora woke to the sound of bells, the alarm system Calder had installed around the estate perimeter. She was dressed and running toward the courtyard within seconds, her heart hammering. Chaos. Everywhere chaos. The refugees were being herded into the reinforced lower levels. The groundskeepers were manning defensive positions. And Calder was in the center of it all, shouting orders with absolute authority. Leora! He spotted her across the courtyard. Get the children below, now! She didn't argue, just ran toward the frightened families clustering near the East Wing entrance. Everyone stay calm, she called out, her voice cutting through the panic. Follow me, we're going somewhere safe. A young mother grabbed her arm. My son, he was in the stables. I'll find him. Get everyone else below. She shouldn't have promised that. She had no idea if she could deliver. But she ran toward the stables anyway, her lungs burning. She found the boy, couldn't have been more than 7, huddled in an empty stall, sobbing. Hey, she said softly, kneeling down. Your mother sent me. We need to go. I'm scared. I know, but you're brave, right? I can tell. Brave people help protect others, so I need you to be brave and help me get everyone safe. Can you do that? He nodded, tears still streaming. She took his hand and ran. They made it halfway across the courtyard when she heard hoofbeats, saw torchlight beyond the gates. The raiders were here. Calder appeared beside her, grabbing her shoulder. Get inside, now. The boy, I've got him, go. He physically pushed her toward the manor entrance, then scooped up the child in one smooth motion and followed. They made it inside as the first arrows hit the courtyard stones. Bar the doors, Calder shouted. Everyone to the lower levels, move. The next hours blurred into adrenaline-soaked chaos. The raiders attacked the gates. The groundskeepers fired from defensive positions. Someone started a fire in the East Wing storage room before being subdued. And through it all, Calder coordinated defense with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else. Except this time, Leora saw what it cost him, saw the fear beneath the authority. The terror that he might fail these people. The weight of every life depending on his decisions. When the garrison finally arrived, summoned by riders Calder had sent days earlier, the raiders scattered into the darkness. The estate had held. Everyone was safe. And Calder stood in the courtyard at dawn, surrounded by refugees who were crying and thanking him, his face locked in that familiar blank mask. But Leora saw his hands shaking. She found him an hour later in the stables, checking on the horses, a transparent excuse to be alone. Hey, she said softly. He didn't look at her, just kept adjusting a bridle with mechanical focus. Calder, I almost got them killed. The boy, you, all of them. You saved them. I should have sent them further south. Should have evacuated earlier. Should have. You made the best decisions you could with the information you had. That's all anyone can do. It's not enough. It was tonight. He finally looked at her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her heart. I was terrified, he said quietly. The entire time. Terrified I'd make the wrong call. Terrified someone would die because I was too rigid, or too slow, or too... She crossed the distance between them and pulled him into a fierce hug. He stiffened for a moment, clearly shocked. Then his arms came around her, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone chaotic. You were magnificent, she whispered against his shoulder. Brave and decisive and exactly what everyone needed. Don't you dare diminish that. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet stable while the estate woke around them. When they finally pulled apart, something fundamental had shifted. Calder looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Leora, a sharp cough from the stable entrance. Mrs. Kellen stood there, her expression carefully neutral. Your Grace, the refugees are asking for you. Calder stepped back immediately, that familiar mask sliding into place. Of course. Thank you, Mrs. Kellen. He left without looking back. Leora stood alone in the stables, her heart racing, her mind spinning. Mrs. Kellen lingered. Be careful, girl. I'm always careful. No, you're bold. There's a difference. The older woman's expression softened, and I think His Grace is starting to notice. She walked away before Leora could respond, leaving her alone with the horses and the terrible, wonderful realization that everything was about to get much more complicated. The refugees stayed for 2 weeks while the garrison hunted down the remaining raiders. In that time, Ashbourne Manor transformed from a fortress of silence into something Leora had never expected. A community. Children played in the courtyards. Families shared meals in the Great Hall. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the household dissolved under the weight of shared crisis, and what emerged was something messier, louder, and infinitely more human. Calder struggled with it visibly. She'd catch him standing in doorways, watching the chaos with an expression caught between longing and terror. Like he wanted to belong to this warmth, but had forgotten how. You could join them, Leora said one evening, finding him outside the Great Hall, while an impromptu music session happened inside. Someone had produced a fiddle, others were singing, badly. I don't know how. You sit down. You listen. That's it. It's not that simple. It actually is. You're the one making it complicated. She grabbed his arm. Come on. Leora. But she was already pulling him into the hall, ignoring his protests. A few people looked up as the Duke entered, but most were too absorbed in the music to care much. Leora found them seats near the back. Calder sat stiffly, looking like he'd rather face another raid. Relax, she whispered. No one's going to bite you. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Sit? You're managing so far. Be normal, casual. I've spent 5 years keeping distance. I don't know how to... He gestured helplessly at the room. Leora's heart ached. Then don't try to be anything. Just be here. That's enough. A child, the same boy she'd rescued from the stables, approached shyly, holding something behind his back. Your Grace? His voice was small. Calder looked startled. Yes? I made you something, to say thank you, for saving me and Mama. He thrust forward a crudely carved wooden horse. It's not very good, but I tried. For a long moment, Calder just stared at the offering. Then, very carefully, he took it. It's perfect, he said quietly. Thank you. The boy beamed and ran back to his mother. Calder sat holding the wooden horse like it was made of glass, his expression raw. See? Leora said softly. You're doing fine. I don't deserve this. Their gratitude. You protected them. You gave them shelter when they had nowhere else to go. That's what they remember, not your doubts. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, something that made her pulse quicken. "Leora, I need to tell you, His Grace!" Pritchard appeared at his elbow, looking agitated. "There's a situation in the courtyard." Calder stood immediately, that mask of control sliding back into place. "What kind of situation?" "A visitor? From the capital. He's demanding to see you immediately." Something cold slithered down Leora's spine. The man in the courtyard was everything the frontier wasn't: polished, elegant, completely out of place against the rough stone and harsh wind. Lord Marcus Vale, Leora's father. She recognized him instantly, even from the window where she'd frozen, watching. Recognized his rigid posture, his expensive traveling coat, the way he surveyed the estate like he was calculating its worth. Her stomach turned to ice. "Do you know him?" Calder asked, appearing beside her. Leora couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Leora? That's my father." The words came out flat, dead. Calder went very still. "Your father, the one you fled from?" "Yes." "How did he find you?" "I don't know. I was careful. I covered everything." Her mind raced, the forged references, the fake name. She'd been so careful, except she'd used her real first name with Calder. And Cressida had been here, had seen her, had probably mentioned her to someone in the capital because gossip was currency among the nobility. "He's going to take me back," she said, panic rising. "He'll drag me back to the estate and marry me off to the highest bidder, and I'll—" "No." Calder's voice was hard. "He won't. You don't understand. Legally, I'm his property until I marry. He has every right." "He has no rights here. This is my estate, my authority." Calder turned to face her fully. "Do you want to see him?" "No, but avoiding him won't." "I'm not suggesting avoidance. I'm asking what you want, because I can send him away. Right now. Tell him you're not here." Leora looked at him in shock. "You'd lie to a lord? For me?" Without hesitation. The simple conviction in his voice nearly undid her. "He won't believe you. He'll search the estate, demand proof. And if he finds out you lied, then I'll deal with the consequences. But I'm not handing you over to someone who sees you as property. Not without your consent." For a moment, Leora couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. "I should face him," she said finally. "Running won't solve anything. It'll just make him more determined. You don't have to do this alone." "Yes, I do. This is my fight." Calder studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll be there. Not interfering, but present. If you need me." "Thank you." She straightened her shoulders, smoothed down her servant's dress, and went to face her father. Lord Marcus Vale looked exactly as she remembered, cold, calculating, with the kind of controlled anger that never showed on the surface but radiated from every movement. He stood in Calder's study like he owned it, examining the sparse furnishings with obvious disdain. "Leora," his voice was flat, "you've led me on quite a chase." "Father," she kept her tone neutral. "How did you find me?" "I have resources." "Did you really think you could simply disappear? That I wouldn't track down my own daughter?" "I'd hoped." His eyes narrowed. "You've embarrassed the family, caused a scandal. Lord Pemberton was prepared to offer for you, a generous offer, considering your age and disposition, and you vanished like a common criminal. I left because I refused to be sold to a man 3 times my age who wanted a decorative wife and a broodmare. You left because you're selfish and ungrateful. I've spent 20 years providing for you, educating you, preparing you for a good match. And this is how you repay me? By running off to play servant in some frontier wasteland?" Calder, standing near the window, made a sound that might have been a cough or suppressed fury. Lord Vale's gaze shifted to him. "And you must be Duke Ashbourne. I apologize for my daughter's deception. She has a talent for manipulation when it suits her." "Miss Grey has been an exemplary employee," Calder said coolly. "Her work is impeccable." "Miss Grey," Lord Vale laughed, sharp and bitter. "Is that what she's calling herself? Her name is Leora Vale. Daughter of a minor southern lord, yes, but still nobility. She has no business working as a servant. She has every business doing whatever she chooses. This doesn't concern you, Your Grace. This is a family matter. It concerns me when it happens on my estate. Calder moved from the window, his posture dangerous. And I'm afraid I can't let you simply take one of my employees without their consent. Lord Vale's expression hardened. She's my daughter, legally. Legally, she's an adult woman who has made her own choices. You have no claim here. I have every claim. She's unmarried, underage by our provincial law. She's 23, Calder said flatly. That's hardly underage by any standard. By Southern law, an unmarried woman remains under her father's authority until marriage or age 25. I have documents, legal precedent, and I'm prepared to involve the magistrate if necessary. Leora felt her stomach drop. She'd forgotten that technicality. In her father's province, the marriage age restrictions were archaic, designed to keep women under male control as long as possible. Then I suppose, Calder said quietly, we'll have to resolve that. How? You can't simply ignore the law because you've grown attached to your housemaid. I can if she's no longer subject to that law. Silence. Lord Vale's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that if Miss Vale were married, she'd be free of your authority. Immediately. Leora's heart stopped. Calder, what are you... But he was already looking at her, his expression intense. Marry me. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Lord Vale laughed. You can't be serious. You'd marry a disobedient girl you've known for a few months just to spite her father? I'd marry her because she's the bravest, most honest person I've ever met. Because she challenges me to be better. Because she makes this frozen wasteland feel like home. Calder's gaze never left Leora's face. And because I'm fairly certain I've been falling in love with her since the moment she lectured me about muddy boots. Leora couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This is absurd, Lord Vale snapped. Leora, stop this nonsense immediately. You're coming home. She looked between her father and Calder. I need a moment. She turned and walked out of the study, her legs shaking, her mind spinning. Behind her, she heard her father's voice. You've made a mistake, Your Grace. My daughter is manipulative, stubborn, and completely unsuitable as a duchess. And Calder's response, quiet and deadly, then we're perfectly matched. Leora found herself in the stables, her refuge, apparently, when the world became too much. Mrs. Kellen found her 10 minutes later. You heard? Leora asked. The whole household heard. Sound travels, remember? The older woman sat down beside her on a hay bale. What are you going to do? I don't know. He offered out of obligation to save me from my father. That's not a real proposal, isn't it? It can't be. He barely knows me. He knows you defended a broken system when everyone else ignored it. He knows you stayed during a raid when you could have hidden. He knows you argue with him about everything, and somehow that makes him smile. Mrs. Kellen's expression softened. That man hasn't smiled in 5 years, girl. Not real smiles. Not until you. That doesn't mean he loves me. No, but he said he did. In front of a lord and half the household staff who were definitely eavesdropping. That's not nothing. Leora buried her face in her hands. What if I say yes and it's a disaster? What if we're wrong for each other and we end up miserable? What if you say no and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? What if you go back with your father and marry some lord who sees you as property? I won't go back. I'll run again. Find somewhere else. Where? How long before your father finds you again? How many times are you going to run instead of fighting for what you actually want? I don't even know what I want. Don't you? The question hung in the air. Leora thought about the past months, thought about arguing with Calder over muddy carpets and broken systems and refugees and chaos. Thought about the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world of performance. Thought about standing in the courtyard during the raid, terrified he'd get hurt defending people who didn't even know his full worth. I want to stay, she admitted quietly. I want to keep arguing with him and pushing him and watching him grow into someone who doesn't just tolerate chaos but embraces it. Her voice broke. I want to see if this thing between us is real, but not because he feels obligated. Then tell him that. What if he changes his mind? What if he doesn't? Mrs. Kellen stood, brushed hay from her skirts. Life's harsh out here, girl. No guarantees, No safety. You either take risks or you survive without living. Your choice. She left Leora alone with the horses and the biggest decision of her life. She found Calder in the study an hour later. Her father had apparently retreated to guest quarters, waiting for her decision. "Hey," she said from the doorway. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Leora. Did you mean it? What you said? Every word? Even the part about falling in love with me?" "Especially that part." He set down his pen. "Though I'll understand if you don't feel the same. The proposal was impulsive, probably inappropriate. You don't have to—" "I'm terrified," she interrupted. He went still. "I'm terrified because I think I'm falling in love with you too, and I have no idea if that's real or just proximity or shared crisis or—" She took a breath. "I came here to escape being property, and now I'm considering marriage, which is basically the same thing in most contexts. It wouldn't be, with us." Calder stood, moving toward her slowly. "I don't want to own you, Leora. I want to fight with you and laugh with you and build something real together, as equals, as partners. You're a duke. I'm a housemaid. We're not equals. You're the daughter of a lord who chose freedom over comfort. I'm a duke who chose exile over performance. We're both running from things. Maybe we could try running toward something instead." "That's terrifyingly optimistic for you." "I'm learning from the best." Despite everything, she smiled. "If I say yes, and I'm not saying I am, but if I did, I have conditions. Name them. I'm not decorative. I won't host social functions or smile politely at people I despise or pretend to be something I'm not." "Good. I hate social functions. I'll keep working, managing things. I'm not going to sit in parlors and embroider. The estate would fall apart without you at this point. I was hoping you'd take over half the administration. And I'm going to keep arguing with you when you're being stubborn or blind or ridiculous. I'm counting on it." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart hammering. "This is insane." "Completely. We barely know each other. We know the important parts. My father will never approve." "I don't care about your father's approval. I care about yours." Leora felt something break open in her chest. Fear and hope and terrifying possibility all tangled together. "Ask me again," she said quietly, "properly. Not as escape from my father, but because you actually want this." Calder moved closer, close enough that she could see the silver in his hair, the winter steel of his eyes, the vulnerability he was letting her see. "Leora Vale, will you marry me? Not because I'm trying to save you from your father, but because I'm fairly certain you're the only person who's ever made me want to be better than I am. Because you're brave and honest and you don't let me hide behind rules and distance. Because the thought of you leaving feels like losing something essential I didn't know I needed until you walked into my library and criticized my carpet care." She laughed through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "Is it working?" "Unfortunately, yes." "So that's yes, I'll marry you. Against all better judgment and common sense." He pulled her into a kiss that was nothing like the controlled, careful man she'd met months ago. This was messy and desperate and real, exactly like everything else between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Calder rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to be terrible at this," he said. "Absolutely horrible." "Good. I wouldn't want it any other way." They told her father the next morning. Lord Vale took it exactly as badly as expected. Threats, legal challenges, predictions of disaster and scandal. Calder listened with his usual blank expression, then quietly informed Lord Vale that the marriage would proceed with or without his blessing, and perhaps it was time for him to leave. "You'll regret this," Lord Vale said to Leora on his way out. "Both of you. This ridiculous frontier fantasy will crumble, and you'll realize what you've thrown away." "I've thrown away a lifetime of being property," Leora said calmly. "I'll take my chances." He left in fury, his carriage disappearing into the morning mist. Calder stood beside Leora in the courtyard, watching until the dust settled. "Any regrets yet?" he asked. "Ask me in 50 years. That's a long time to wait for an answer. You'll just have to be patient." He took her hand, linking their fingers together. "I can do patient, I think. You're terrible at patient. Then you'll have to teach me. They stood like that for a long moment, holding hands in the cold morning air, while the household began to wake around them. It felt like beginning, like possibility. It felt right. They planned the wedding for 2 weeks later, a small ceremony, just the household and the remaining refugees. Nothing fancy, nothing performative, exactly what both of them wanted. But the frontier had other plans. 3 days before the wedding, the first snow began to fall. Not the gentle dusting they'd expected, but a brutal storm that rolled in from the north with the force of a physical assault. Within hours, the temperature dropped so sharply that water froze in the pipes. The wind howled like a living thing. Snow piled against the doors faster than they could clear it, and trapped in the storm with limited supplies were still 37 refugees who'd been planning to leave but hadn't yet secured transport. Calder went into crisis mode immediately, rationing supplies, organizing warmth management, calculating how long they could survive if the storm didn't break. 3 days became 5. 5 became a week. Food supplies dwindled, firewood ran low. People started getting sick. Nothing serious yet, but exposure and cold were insidious killers on the frontier. And through it all, Calder held everything together with sheer force of will. Leora watched him growing thinner, more exhausted, more desperate, watched him calculating survival odds when he thought no one was looking. "We need to send someone for help," she said on the 8th day. "We can't. The storm's too severe. No one would make it to the garrison." "Then we need to do something else, because people are getting sick, Calder, and if this goes on much longer—" "I know." His voice was ragged. "I'm working on it." But there was nothing to work on. They were trapped, slowly freezing, watching supplies dwindle with no end in sight. On the 10th day, Leora made a decision. She knew the terrain, had studied the maps. There was an old hunting lodge 2 miles northeast, abandoned, but it would have firewood, possibly stored supplies. It was a long shot, but it was something. She told Mrs. Kellen her plan. The older woman looked horrified. "You'll freeze to death out there." "I'll freeze to death in here if I don't try. We all will." "His Grace will never allow it. That's why I'm not telling him." She left before dawn, bundled in every piece of warm clothing she could find, carrying rope and a compass and absolute certainty that this was either brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both. The storm hit her like a wall the moment she left the estate boundary. Wind that stole her breath, snow that blinded her, cold that sank into her bones within minutes. She pushed forward anyway, following the compass, counting steps, refusing to let herself think about how easily she could get lost and simply stop. The lodge appeared like a miracle after what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, a squat stone building half buried in snow. The door was frozen shut. She kicked it until her foot went numb, finally breaking through. Inside was dark, freezing, but there, yes, there, stacked firewood, preserved food in sealed containers, emergency supplies that someone had stored years ago and forgotten. Enough to keep the estate alive until the storm broke. Relief flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. Then she tried to leave and realized the storm had gotten worse. Much worse. The path she'd followed was completely obscured. The compass spun uselessly. She'd gotten turned around in the lodge, lost her bearings. She couldn't see 5 feet in any direction. Panic clawed at her throat. She pushed it down, tried to think logically. She had supplies. She could wait out the storm here. Calder would send searchers eventually. Except he didn't know where she'd gone. No one did. And the cold was already seeping through her layers, making her fingers numb, her thoughts slow. She had to try. Had to get back. She stepped out into the storm and immediately lost all sense of direction. Walked for what felt like hours. Might have been minutes. Time became meaningless in the white chaos. Her feet went numb first, then her hands. Her face felt like it was burning and freezing simultaneously. She fell, got up, fell again. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was how people died. Lost in storms, freezing slowly, making bad decisions while their brains slowly shut down from hypothermia. She fell a 3rd time and couldn't get up. The snow felt almost warm now, comfortable. That was bad. She knew that was bad, but she was so tired. Just a moment's rest. Just a moment. She closed her eyes. Ugh. She woke to shouting, hands grabbing her, heat. found her! I found her! Calder's voice, ragged and desperate. She tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't move. Stay with me. Stay with me. We're getting you home. She felt herself being lifted, carried. The storm still howled, but she was wrapped in something warm. His coat, she realized distantly. He'd given her his coat. Stupid, he was muttering as he stumbled through the snow. So stupid. Why did you... What were you... If you die, I swear... She wanted to tell him about the lodge, the supplies, that it had been worth it. But the cold was pulling her down again, into darkness that felt like peace. She surrendered to it. The world came back in pieces. Heat. Painful burning heat. Voices arguing somewhere distant. Hypothermia, possibly frostbite. We won't know the extent until... Fix her. I don't care what it takes. Fix her. Calder's voice, stripped of all control. She tried to open her eyes, managed it partially. She was in her room. No, Calder's room. The master bedroom, with its massive fireplace blazing. He sat beside the bed, holding her hand, his face haggard. Lyora? His voice cracked on her name. Found supplies? Her voice was barely a whisper. I know. The search party found the lodge. Brought everything back. You saved us. His grip tightened on her hand. You also nearly killed yourself. What were you thinking? That we needed help. We needed you alive. The raw emotion in his voice made her chest hurt. I'm okay. You're not okay. You have hypothermia and possible frostbite, and the physician says we won't know for days if there's permanent damage. That's not okay. She managed a weak smile. Always so dramatic. This isn't funny. Little bit funny. Her eyes drifted closed again. Thought you'd be proud. Proud? You terrified me. When I realized you were gone, when I found you in the snow, barely breathing, his voice broke completely. I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I just... But she was already sinking back into darkness. The fever came that night. Her body's response to the extreme cold, the physician explained. Dangerous, but manageable if they kept her warm and hydrated. Calder refused to leave her side. For 3 days, he sat beside her bed while she burned and shivered alternately, sometimes delirious, sometimes lucid. In the lucid moments, she'd find him there. Always there. Exhaustion carved into every line of his face. You should sleep, she whispered during one of those moments. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see you in the snow. Not breathing. I thought... He stopped, jaw tight. I thought you were dead. Takes more than snow to kill me. Don't joke about this. His hand tightened on hers. I can't do this without you. I thought I could. Thought I was fine alone. But you walked into my life and broke everything open. And now the thought of going back to that silence is... His voice cracked. I can't. Not going anywhere, she managed. You almost did. But didn't. She squeezed his hand weakly. Stubborn, remember? He laughed, sharp and bitter. Terrifyingly stubborn. Learned from the best. The fever pulled her under again, but she fell feeling his hand in hers, steady and warm. She woke on the 4th day with her mind clear. Calder was asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head pillowed on his arms, his face turned toward her. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his clothes rumpled like he'd slept in them for days, which he probably had. Lyora tried to sit up. Her body protested violently. Everything hurt, but she managed it. The movement woke him instantly. His head snapped up, eyes wild for a moment before focusing on her face. Lyora? Hey. Her voice was rough but functional. How do you feel? Like I got trampled by frozen horses, but alive. Something in his expression crumbled. He dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. It took her a moment to realize he was crying. Calder Ashbourne, Duke of the Frozen Frontier, master of control and emotional distance, was crying. Hey, she said softly, reaching for him. I'm okay. I'm here. You could have died. Because I didn't, because I was too focused on. He looked up at her, his face wet. This is my fault. I should have seen how desperate things were. Should have sent for help sooner. Should have. You did everything right. This was my choice. My risk. A risk you shouldn't have had to take. But I did. And it worked. Everyone's safe now, right? The storm broke? Yesterday. The garrison sent supplies this morning. Everyone's fine. Then it was worth it. Don't say that. Your life is not worth. Yes, it is. She pulled him closer, ignoring the pain. Every single person in this manor is worth risk. You taught me that. When you sheltered the refugees, when you faced the raiders, you put yourself in danger for people you barely knew because it was right. I did the same thing. That's different. How? Because losing them would hurt. Losing you would destroy me. The words hung in the air between them. Leora felt tears burning in her own eyes now. Then it's a good thing you found me. I almost didn't. If the search party had gone even slightly different direction, but they didn't. You found me. You brought me home. Home, he laughed weakly. You keep calling this home. Isn't it? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he climbed onto the bed beside her, carefully avoiding her injuries, and pulled her into his arms. Yes, he said against her hair. It is. They lay like that for a long time, holding each other while the fire crackled and the winter sun slowly rose outside. The wedding was postponed for 2 weeks while Leora recovered. Her father sent a letter, brief, cold, disowning her officially. Leora read it once and burned it without comment. The refugees had all left safely once the storm cleared, escorted by garrison soldiers back to their homesteads or new settlements further south. Life at Ashbourne Manor returned to something almost resembling normal, except quieter now, emptier. I miss them, Leora admitted one evening, watching the empty courtyard. Calder stood beside her, his arm around her waist. So do I. Strange, isn't it? I spent years craving silence. Now it feels hollow. We could do something about that. Like what? Open the estate. Not permanently, but regularly. Travelers, people who need shelter. The frontier's harsh. We have space and resources. We could use them. He was quiet for a moment, then that would be chaos. Yes, unpredictable. Absolutely. The complete opposite of everything I built here. I know. He smiled, genuine, warm, the kind of smile that had become more frequent in recent weeks. Let's do it. Really? Really? You were right about everything else. Why stop now? She turned to face him fully. I wasn't right about everything. I was reckless during the storm. Nearly got myself killed. Yes. And I spent 3 days wanting to strangle you and hold you simultaneously. His expression sobered. Don't do that again. No promises. I'm fairly reckless by nature. I've noticed. He pulled her closer. But maybe warn me next time before you run off into a deadly blizzard. I'll try to remember. That's not reassuring. It's the best you're going to get. He kissed her then, soft and careful, mindful of her still healing body. When they pulled apart, his expression was serious. I love you, he said. I need you to know that. Not because you almost died. Not because you're brave or honest or challenge me constantly, but because you're you. And I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Leora felt her throat tighten. I love you too. Even though you're stubborn and emotionally repressed and you track mud everywhere. I've gotten better about the mud. You've gotten better about a lot of things. So have you. Have I? You've learned when to fight and when to let go, when to push and when to hold back. You're still fearless, but you're not careless anymore. I ran into a blizzard 3 weeks ago. For a good reason, that's the difference. They stood together in the window, watching the winter sun sink below the horizon, painting the frozen plains in shades of gold and pink. 2 more weeks, Leora said quietly. Until I'm officially Duchess Ashbourne. Having second thoughts? Constantly. You? Every day. He pulled her closer. But I'm doing it anyway. Why? Because some risks are worth taking, and you're worth every single one. She turned in his arms and kissed him properly, pouring everything she felt into it, love and fear and hope and absolute certainty that this was right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Calder rested his forehead against hers. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" he whispered. "No idea, but it's going to be interesting." Terrifying is more accurate. Same thing. He laughed, and the sound filled the empty manor with something that felt like promise. 2 weeks later, in a small ceremony attended by household staff and a few close neighbors, Leora Vale became Duchess Ashbourne. She wore a simple dress. Calder forgot half his vows and had to be prompted. The cake was lopsided and slightly burned. It was perfect. That night, lying in their shared bed while the wind howled outside, Calder whispered, "No regrets?" Leora thought about everything she'd left behind, everything she'd gained, the risks she'd taken, and the life she'd chosen. Not a single one. She felt him smile against her hair. Outside, the frontier winter raged on, brutal, unforgiving, exactly as harsh as it had always been. But inside Ashbourne Manor, something new was growing, something that felt like home. Spring came to the frontier like a hesitant guest, melting snow revealing dead grass and mud before anything green dared to emerge. The transformation was slow, brutal, and utterly real, just like everything else about their new life. Leora stood in the courtyard watching workers repair winter damage to the eastern wall, her hand resting absently on her still flat stomach. 3 months married, 2 months pregnant, 1 month of knowing and not telling anyone except Mrs. Kellen, who'd figured it out when Leora couldn't tolerate the smell of coffee anymore. She needed to tell Calder, soon. But every time she tried, something else demanded attention. Supplies shipments, structural repairs, the constant stream of travelers who'd started appearing once word spread that Ashbourne Manor offered shelter. They'd kept their promise. Opened the estate to anyone who needed it, and the frontier had responded by sending everyone, traders, refugees, wanderers, families displaced by raids or weather, or simple bad luck. The household that had once prized silence now rang with voices, arguments, children's laughter, the organized chaos of a community instead of a fortress. Calder was managing better than she'd expected. Still uncomfortable with the noise, still retreating to his study when it got overwhelming, but adapting. Learning to exist in the mess instead of fighting it. "Duchess!" Young Tommy ran up, now 16 and acting as unofficial messenger. "There's a delegation at the gate, from the capital. They're asking for his grace." Leora's stomach tightened. Nothing good ever came from the capital. "What kind of delegation?" "Official. Lots of papers and fancy clothes." The lead man said something about an inquiry. She found Calder in the stables, checking on a mare that had thrown a shoe. "We have visitors," she said without preamble. "Capital delegation. Inquiry of some kind." His expression darkened. "About what?" Tommy didn't know, but they look official. Nothing from the capital is ever good news. He stood, brushing hay from his clothes. "Let's get this over with." The delegation consisted of 5 men in expensive traveling coats, led by a thin, severe-looking official with the kind of face that suggested he'd never smiled in his life. "Duke Ashbourne," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I am Lord Garrett Wilmington, sent by the Council of Provincial Lords to investigate certain irregularities regarding your estate management." Calder's expression went carefully blank. "What irregularities?" "Reports have reached the capital suggesting you've been operating this estate as an unlicensed refuge, harboring unknown travelers without proper documentation, distributing resources without authorization, essentially running a charity institution without noble charter or oversight." "I've been offering shelter to people in need. That's hardly irregular." "It is when done without official sanction. The provincial laws are quite clear. Charitable institutions require formal approval and regular inspections to ensure they're not being used for criminal purposes." "Criminal purposes? These are families, travelers, people who need temporary shelter. And how do you verify they're not bandits, criminals fleeing justice, spies from hostile territories?" Lord Wilmington pulled out a leather folder. "We've received complaints from several neighboring lords suggesting your unconventional approach is attracting undesirable elements to the region." Leora stepped forward before Calder could respond. Which neighboring lords? Wilmington's gaze shifted to her, dismissive. That's confidential, Duchess. It's relevant, because the neighboring lords have been trying to buy this estate for years. Calder refused. This feels less like legitimate concern and more like political maneuvering. Your opinion is noted and irrelevant. Wilmington turned back to Calder. We're here to conduct a formal inspection. If we find evidence of illegal activity or gross mismanagement, the Council has authority to revoke your administrative privileges and place the estate under receivership. The words fell like stones. Calder's jaw tightened. You want to take my estate. We want to ensure it's being run according to provincial law. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear. And if your inspection is designed to find problems whether they exist or not. That's a serious accusation, Your Grace. It's a realistic concern given the circumstances. Wilmington smiled thinly. Then I suggest you cooperate fully. We'll begin immediately. Oh, the inspection was brutal and thorough. They went through every ledger, every supply record, every piece of documentation relating to estate management. They interviewed staff, examined facilities, counted inventory with obsessive precision, and they found problems. Minor ones, mostly. Paperwork filed incorrectly, supply distributions documented informally rather than officially, travelers housed without proper identity verification. Things that happened when you prioritize people over bureaucracy. Things that could be framed as serious violations if someone wanted them to be. This is a disaster, Calder said on the third night, pacing his study while Leora watched. They're building a case. Every informal process, every decision I made to help people instead of following protocol, it's all being documented as evidence of mismanagement. Then we fight back. With what? I broke their rules. Not intentionally, but legally it doesn't matter. If they want to take the estate, they have grounds. No, they have excuses. There's a difference. Leora moved to the desk, spreading out the inspection reports. Look at what they're actually citing. Incomplete documentation, informal processes, lack of official oversight. None of that is illegal. It's just not how they prefer things to be done. In provincial law, preference and requirement are often the same thing. Only if nobody challenges them. She tapped the reports. These neighboring lords, they've wanted your land for years, but they can't just take it. So they're using bureaucracy as a weapon, making normal charitable work look criminal through selective interpretation. So what do? We make it impossible for them to twist the truth. We document everything, properly this time. We get statements from every person we've helped. We create an official charter for the shelter program, submit it for approval, make everything so transparent they can't claim shadowy motives. Calder stopped pacing. That's exhausting? Yes, but possible. I was going to say brilliant. He looked at her with something approaching hope. You think it'll work? I think it's our best shot. Unless you want to just let them take everything you've built. Not a chance. Then we fight, properly, with their own weapons. The next 2 weeks were brutal. They worked 18-hour days documenting every shelter case, creating formal processes, drafting charter language that would satisfy legal requirements while still allowing them to actually help people. Mrs. Kellen organized the staff into a coordinated testimony unit. Every employee prepared statements about the estate's operations, emphasizing safety, organization, and legitimate charitable purpose. Tommy rode to every homestead they'd helped, collecting written testimonials from grateful families. And Leora drafted the official charter with the kind of precise legal language she'd learned watching her father navigate Southern politics for 20 years. Lord Wilmington watched it all with thinly veiled irritation. You're wasting your time, he said on the 10th day, finding Leora in the library surrounded by documents. The council has already made its decision. Have they? Or are you hoping we'll give up before forcing them to actually review the evidence? His expression hardened. You're out of your depth, Duchess. This isn't some romantic frontier adventure. This is provincial politics. You and your husband are idealistic children playing at reform. We're adults running a successful estate while providing genuine community service. You're politicians manufacturing problems to justify stealing land. I know which position I'd rather defend publicly. You think public opinion matters? I think it does when the alternative is admitting the council tried to seize a functioning charitable operation because neighboring lords wanted to expand their holdings. That's the kind of corruption people tend to remember. Wilmington's smile was ice. Careful, Duchess. Accusations like that can be dangerous. So can transparent documentation, which we now have, extensively. She held his gaze until he looked away first. The formal review is in 3 days, he said stiffly. At the provincial capital, the Duke will present his case to the full council. We'll be there. He left without another word. Calder appeared in the doorway moments later. Did you just threaten a Lord Council inspector? I pointed out the political optics of their position. That's different. Leora, he's counting on us being too intimidated to fight back. We're not, are we? Calder looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, small, fierce, proud. Not even close. The journey to the provincial capital took 2 days. They brought Mrs. Kellen, Pritchard, and a trunk full of documentation that weighed more than most people. The capital was everything the frontier wasn't. Crowded, loud, performative. Buildings stacked on buildings, people everywhere, the air thick with smoke and noise, and the particular smell of too many humans living too close together. Leora hated it immediately. Calder looked physically ill. How did you survive here? She asked as their carriage navigated the packed streets. Poorly. I mostly stayed drunk or angry, sometimes both. That explains a lot. The frontier was supposed to be exile, punishment for choosing to leave. Turns out it was the best decision I ever made. He took her hand. Well, second best. What was first? Hiring an impertinent housemaid who criticized my carpet care. Despite her nervousness, she smiled. Best decision of your life? Absolutely. Though it's caused me nothing but trouble since. You like trouble now. I like you. The trouble just comes with the package. The council chambers were imposing, all marble columns and vaulted ceilings, and the kind of architectural intimidation designed to make petitioners feel small. Leora refused to be intimidated. She walked in beside Calder, head high, wearing the one formal dress she'd allowed Mrs. Kellen to commission. Simple, elegant, utterly devoid of the fussy ornamentation capital women seemed to prefer. The council sat in a semicircle on raised seats, 12 lords, all men, all wearing expressions of varying disinterest. Lord Wilmington stood at the prosecutor's position, looking smugly confident. Duke Ashbourne, the council head began, an elderly lord named Pembroke. You stand accused of operating an unlicensed charitable institution, harboring undocumented travelers, and gross mismanagement of estate resources. How do you plead? Not guilty, Calder said firmly, and I request the opportunity to present evidence refuting these charges. Proceed. For the next hour, Calder laid out their case with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. He presented documentation, testimonials, financial records proving the estate was not only solvent but profitable despite the shelter program. He was nervous. Leora could see it in the tightness of his shoulders, the careful control of his voice, but he pushed through. When he finished, Lord Wilmington stood. A compelling presentation, Your Grace. However, it doesn't address the fundamental issue. You operated outside proper channels, helped people without authorization, created systems without oversight. Regardless of outcome, the process was illegal. Was it? Leora stood before Calder could respond. Because I've reviewed the provincial charter extensively, and I can't find any law requiring prior approval for humanitarian assistance on one's own estate. Wilmington's expression tightened. The council regulations clearly state council regulations are not law, they're administrative preferences, and while we certainly could have followed them, failure to do so isn't illegal. It's just unconventional. Murmurs rippled through the council. Lord Pembroke leaned forward. You're arguing a technicality, Duchess. I'm arguing that my husband broke no actual laws. He simply prioritized human welfare over bureaucratic formality, which, last I checked, was supposed to be the purpose of noble stewardship. The purpose of noble stewardship is maintaining order and stability. Is it? Because I thought it was protecting and serving the people under our care. Maybe I misunderstood. She pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are testimonials from 47 families we've sheltered in the past 6 months, Farmers, traders, families fleeing raids, every single one would have suffered without our help. Some would have died. She began reading names, stories, specific instances where Ashbourne Manor's shelter had meant the difference between survival and tragedy. The council shifted uncomfortably. "We've heard enough," Wilmington started. "I don't think you have," Leora interrupted, "because you're trying to frame humanitarian work as criminal negligence. And these people, real people, not abstract policy concerns, deserve to have their truth heard. Duchess, this is highly irregular. So is trying to seize a functioning estate because neighboring lords want the land. But here we are." The chamber went very quiet. Lord Pembroke's expression was unreadable. "That's a serious allegation. It's a factual observation. The 3 lords who filed complaints against us have all made purchase offers for Ashbourne lands in the past 2 years. All were refused. This investigation began within weeks of the last refusal. The pattern is fairly obvious. You're accusing fellow lords of corruption? I'm pointing out that their motivations might not be as pure as they claim, just like our shelter program isn't as criminal as they suggest." Wilmington stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. The Duchess has no standing to make these accusations. She's a former servant with ideas above her station, manipulating a grieving duke for her own advancement." "Careful." Calder's voice was quiet, deadly. "You're talking about my wife." "I'm talking about a woman who fled her family in disgrace, fabricated credentials to infiltrate your household, and has systematically undermined your judgment since she saved my life." Calder moved to stand beside Leora. "And the lives of everyone on my estate. She saw problems I was blind to, fixed systems I didn't know were broken. And yes, she challenged me, constantly, because she's brave enough to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. That's not manipulation, that's integrity." The council was staring now. Calder continued, his voice gaining strength. 5 years ago, I came to the frontier to hide, to punish myself for surviving when my brother didn't. I built walls, literal and figurative, and called it duty. Then Leora walked in and broke everything open, made me see that isolation isn't strength, that order without compassion is just cruelty, that the whole point of having power is using it to help people who don't have any. He looked at Lord Pembroke directly. "So yes, I ran my estate unconventionally. I prioritized people over paperwork. I offered shelter without demanding documentation, because on the frontier, bureaucracy kills, cold kills, indifference kills, and I wasn't willing to let people die while I waited for official approval to help them." Silence. Then Lord Pembroke said quietly, "That's quite a speech, Your Grace." "It's the truth." "And what about these allegations regarding your accuser's motives?" Leora pulled out another document. "I have correspondence between Lord Harrington and Lord Vale, my father, actually, discussing a joint purchase offer for Ashbourne lands, dated 2 weeks before this investigation began. They're not even hiding the coordination." She passed it to the council clerk, who brought it to Pembroke. The head councillor read it slowly. His expression darkened. "Lord Wilmington, did you know about this?" Wilmington had gone very pale. "I was informed there were concerns about estate management. I was not made aware of any commercial interests." "You were used as a weapon in a land grab. How does that feel?" "My lord, I assure you—" "Enough!" Pembroke set down the letter. "This council will not be party to corrupt seizures disguised as administrative oversight. The charges against Duke Ashbourne are dismissed. Furthermore, I'm recommending a formal inquiry into the lords who filed these complaints." Relief flooded through Leora so intensely she nearly swayed. Calder's hand found hers squeezing tight. "However," Pembroke continued, "the Duchess is correct that your shelter program should be properly chartered, not for legal reasons, but for practical ones. If you're going to continue this work, and I hope you will, you should have official protection." "We'll submit the charter immediately," Calder said. "See that you do." Pembroke's expression softened slightly. "And Duke Ashbourne? What you're doing on the frontier, providing real help to real people, that's what noble stewardship is supposed to look like. Don't let political games convince you otherwise." "Thank you, my lord." "Don't thank me. Thank your wife. She's the one who fought back." They left the capitals that afternoon, not wanting to spend another moment in the crowded, performative city. In the carriage, Calder pulled Leora into his arms and held her without speaking for almost an hour. Finally, "You were magnificent." I was terrified. "You hid it well." Years of practice pretending to be interested in terrible conversation. Finally useful. He laughed against her hair. "We won. We survived. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Winning would be if they actually changed the system. We just convinced them not to destroy us this time. That's survival." "I'll take it." He pulled back to look at her face. "Though I suspect you're going to spend the next decade trying to change the system anyway." "Probably. Is that a problem?" "Not even slightly." He kissed her forehead. "But maybe warn me before you decide to pick fights with entire provincial councils." "Where's the fun in that?" "Leora." "I'm joking, mostly." She settled back against him. "We need to talk." "About what?" "I'm pregnant." She felt him go completely still. Then, "What?" "Pregnant, about 3 months. I wanted to tell you earlier, but there was always some crisis, and then the investigation. And are you breathing? You should probably breathe." He pulled back, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. We're having a baby, yes. And you just casually mentioned this? After fighting the provincial council? While traveling? I mentioned it at a quiet moment. This seemed quiet. "Leora!" "What? You wanted me to interrupt the hearing to announce it? Your honors, before we continue, I'm pregnant?" That seemed excessive. He laughed, shocked, overwhelmed, bordering on hysterical. "You're impossible. You married me anyway. Best mistake of my life." "It's not a mistake if you're happy with the outcome." He pulled her close again, his hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "I'm terrified." "Me too. I have no idea how to be a father. I have no idea how to be a mother. We'll figure it out. What if I'm terrible at it? Then our child will grow up with an imperfect parent who tries anyway. Could be worse." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I love you. So much it scares me sometimes." "Good. Fear keeps you honest." "That's a terrible philosophy." "It's worked so far." The carriage rolled on through the spring landscape, carrying them back toward the frontier and home. Word of their council victory spread across the frontier faster than fire. By the time they returned to Ashbourne Manor, they were greeted by a crowd. Former refugees, neighboring homesteaders, travelers they'd helped, all gathered to celebrate. It was loud and chaotic, and everything Calder had spent years trying to avoid. He loved it. Leora watched him move through the crowd, accepting congratulations and thanks with gradually increasing ease. He was still awkward, still more comfortable with silence than noise, but he was trying, learning to exist in the mess. Mrs. Kellen appeared at her elbow. "You told him." "About the baby? Yes. And?" "He's terrified and thrilled in equal measure. So, normal. You're going to need help when the time comes." "I know. I'm hoping you'll—" "Of course I will. Someone needs to make sure you don't do anything stupid like deliver during a blizzard rescue mission." "That was one time. Once was enough." The older woman's expression softened. "You've changed this place. Changed him. For the better." "We changed each other. That's how it works." "Not always, but when it does, it's worth everything." Leora looked across the courtyard to where Calder was talking to a farmer whose homestead they'd helped rebuild after the raids. He was smiling, genuine, warm, the kind of smile that had become more common in recent months. He caught her eye, and the smile widened. She felt her heart do that complicated thing it always did around him. Equal parts love and exasperation and absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. That night, after the celebration had wound down and the household had settled into sleep, Calder found her on the eastern wall watching the stars. "You should be resting. Pregnant women need rest. Pregnant women need many things. Rest is somewhere on the list after not being treated like fragile glass." "I'm trying to be considerate. Try being normal instead." He moved to stand beside her, looking out over the dark plains. "Today was significant. We didn't get destroyed by bureaucrats. That's definitely significant. More than that, we proved something. that it's possible to help people and survive the political consequences, that integrity can win against corruption, that we make a good team? Yes, that. He turned to face her. I know I'm difficult, rigid, still learning how to be human instead of just functional. But with you, you're doing fine, Calder, better than fine. You stood in front of the council and defended not just me, but everything we've built. That took courage. You gave me that courage. Before you, I was just existing, going through motions. Now I'm actually living. Good, because I have plans. Why does that terrify me? Because you know me. She grinned. We're going to expand the shelter program, make it official and permanent, create a network across the frontier so no one has to face crisis alone. That's ambitious. It's necessary. It'll be difficult. Everything worth doing is difficult. He studied her face in the starlight. When did you become such an optimist? When I met a stubborn duke who taught me that changing broken systems is possible if you're willing to fight for it. I taught you that? Among other things. Like what? That muddy boots are unacceptable under any circumstances. He laughed, pulling her into his arms. I've created a monster. You've created a partner. There's a difference. They stood together on the wall, looking out over the estate that had become their home, the frontier that had tested and transformed them both. In the distance, lights flickered in homesteads they'd helped protect, families safe because they'd chosen to fight instead of hide. I'm glad you walked into my library that day, Calder said quietly. Even though I criticized your carpet care? Especially because of that. You saw me clearly from the beginning, saw past the title and the walls to the person underneath. No one else ever bothered. That's because everyone else was afraid of you. You weren't? I was terrified. I just hid it better. By arguing with me constantly? It's a proven strategy. He kissed her then, soft and thorough, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Leora said, We should go inside, it's cold. In a minute. I want to remember this. Remember what? This moment. Standing here with you, knowing we survived the capital and we're going to have a child and we built something real out of absolutely nothing. I want to remember that it's possible. It's more than possible, it's happening. Because of you. Because of us. He smiled, full, genuine, the kind of smile that still surprised her with its warmth. Yes, because of us. They stood together in the cold spring night, watching their frontier home settle into peaceful sleep, two people who'd found each other in the chaos and built something stronger than either of them could have managed alone. The provincial council had tried to destroy them and failed. The frontier had tested them, and they'd survived. And now, against all odds and conventional wisdom, they were building something new. A community based on honesty instead of hierarchy, compassion instead of control, truth instead of performance. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and difficult and constantly challenging. But it was real. And real, Leora had learned, was worth fighting for. Below them, a light appeared in one of the guest rooms. Another traveler settling in for the night, finding shelter in the place that had once been a fortress of silence. Calder's hand found hers, linking their fingers together. Ready to face whatever comes next? He asked. With you? Always. Even when it's difficult? Especially then. They turned from the wall and headed inside toward warmth and home and the future they were building one honest moment at a time. The frontier night settled around Ashbourne Manor, cold and clear and full of stars. And inside the stone walls, something that felt like hope had taken root and refused to let go. 6 months after their victory at the provincial council, the official charter arrived. Thick parchment, ornate seals, legal language that essentially said what Leora had been arguing all along. Humanitarian work didn't require permission, just documentation. They'd won, officially. It felt anticlimactic. I thought I'd feel different, Calder said, holding the charter in his study. More triumphant. Leora, now visibly pregnant and perpetually uncomfortable, shifted in her chair. Triumph is overrated. We did the work. The paperwork is just confirmation. Still, after everything, the investigation, the hearing, the threats, I expected the resolution to feel bigger. It is big, just not dramatic. Most real victories aren't. He set down the charter and moved to kneel beside her chair, his hand resting on her swollen belly. How are you feeling? Like I'm carrying a small boulder that occasionally kicks? You? Terrified the baby will inherit your stubbornness. Or your rigid need for control. That's a horrifying thought. We're doomed either way. But they were smiling when they said it, the kind of comfortable teasing that had replaced their earlier sharp arguments. Not because the edges had worn smooth, but because they'd learned to fight and love simultaneously. The baby kicked hard enough that Calder felt it. His expression shifted to wonder. That's our child. Observant as always. I'm serious. That's a whole person. Who's going to depend on us, trust us? We're responsible for... He stopped, overwhelmed. Leora took his hand. We're going to make mistakes. Probably lots of them. But we'll figure it out together, like everything else. What if I'm too rigid, too distant? What if I can't? You learn to run a chaotic shelter program and survive political attacks and exist in a household that's constantly loud. You'll learn to be a father, too. That's different. Not really. Both require adapting to chaos while maintaining core principles. You're already good at it. He looked at her for a long moment, something soft in his expression. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too stubborn to notice. Fair point. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Kellen entered, looking unusually agitated. Your Grace, there's a situation at the front gate. Calder stood immediately. What kind of situation? Refugees, a lot of them, maybe 60 people. They're saying bandits destroyed their settlement 3 days north. They walked here with nothing but what they could carry. Leora struggled to her feet. Are they injured? Some. Mostly just exhausted and terrified. Calder was already moving toward the door. Get the medical supplies. Open the guest wings. Tell the kitchen to prepare food for... How many did you say? 60. Possibly more. He paused. We don't have supplies for 60 additional people, not long term. Then we'll figure it out, Leora said. We always do. Come. The refugees filled the courtyard like a tide of desperation. Families clutching children, elderly people leaning on younger relatives, faces hollow with exhaustion and fear. Leora moved through them with practiced efficiency despite her pregnancy, directing people toward shelter, food, warmth. Calder coordinated logistics with the same methodical precision he brought to everything, calculating supplies and space and sustainability. By evening, everyone was housed, barely. The estate was packed beyond reasonable capacity, every available space converted to temporary shelter. This isn't sustainable, Pritchard said during the emergency staff meeting. We have food for maybe 2 weeks, 3 if we ration severely, and winter's coming. We can't house this many people through frontier winter. Then we'll find more supplies, Calder said. From where? The village is already strained. The garrison has their own concerns. We're isolated out here, Your Grace. There's no magical solution. Then we create one. How? Leora spoke up. We send requests to every estate within 3 days' ride. Explain the situation. Ask for whatever they can spare. Some will refuse, but some might help. Why would they help us? Most of the neighboring lords hate us for the shelter program. They've made that clear. Because, Leora said quietly, this isn't about politics anymore. It's about 60 people who will freeze or starve without help. And if the neighboring lords are truly as heartless as Pritchard suggests, then we document that too. Make it public. Let people see who values property over human life. Calder looked at her with something approaching awe. You want to shame them into helping. I want to give them the opportunity to be decent. What they do with that opportunity is their choice. But yes, if they refuse, I'm absolutely willing to make that refusal public. That's brilliant and slightly terrifying. I learned from the best. They sent riders the next morning with carefully worded requests for aid. Not demands, not accusations, just honest explanations of the crisis and requests for whatever assistance neighboring estates could provide. 5 estates responded within 3 days. 4 refused, politely but firmly. They had their own concerns, their own people to protect. They couldn't spare resources for Ashbourne's overflow population. The fifth response came from an unexpected source, Lord Edmund Thorne, whose estate bordered theirs to the west. An elderly lord who'd always been neutral in frontier politics, neither friendly nor hostile. He sent 3 wagon loads of supplies: grain, preserved meat, winter vegetables, blankets, medical provisions, enough to sustain the refugee population for at least a month. He also sent a letter. Calder read it aloud to Leora that evening. Your Grace, I've spent 40 years on this frontier watching lords prioritize property over people. I'm old enough now to not care about political consequences. What you're doing, actually helping instead of just performing charity, that's what noble stewardship was supposed to be. I'm sending what I can spare. It's not enough, but it's something. Keep fighting. Thorn. Leora felt tears burning in her eyes. We're not alone. No, we're not. Calder set down the letter. Though we're still vastly outnumbered by people who think we're idiots. Let them think that. We know the truth, which is that helping people matters more than appearing proper, that real work is better than perfect performance, that— She winced, hand going to her belly. What's wrong? Nothing. Just a strong kick. The baby doesn't like speeches, apparently. Takes after me, then. The baby is going to be a perfect combination of both of us. Stubborn, rigid, argumentative, and completely impossible. I can't wait. Despite the discomfort, despite the overcrowded estate and dwindling supplies and constant uncertainty, Leora smiled. Neither can I. The refugees stayed through autumn and into early winter. Some found new settlements and moved on. Others stayed, integrating into the estate community, taking on work in exchange for shelter. The household that had once been a fortress of silence became a genuine community, messy, loud, constantly evolving. Calder struggled with it daily, but he also thrived in ways Leora had never expected. He was learning to exist in chaos without trying to control every variable, learning to trust people instead of just managing them. The transformation was slow and imperfect. He still retreated to his study when overwhelmed, still struggled with unexpected disruption, still had moments where the old rigidity reasserted itself. But he was trying, genuinely trying, and on the frontier where survival itself required constant adaptation, trying was enough. Your Grace! Tommy ran into the courtyard where Leora was overseeing food distribution. The Duchess needs to come quick. Something's wrong. Wait. She was the Duchess. She followed Tommy at an awkward run, her pregnant belly making speed difficult. He led her to the eastern guest wing, where a small crowd had gathered outside one of the rooms. Mrs. Kellen met her at the door. It's Maya, the young mother from the northern settlement. She's in labor, but something's wrong. The baby's breech and she's bleeding more than she should. Leora's medical knowledge was limited, learned from frontier necessity rather than formal training. Breech births were dangerous. Excessive bleeding was worse. Where's the physician? 3 hours away. We sent a rider, but we don't have 3 hours. Leora pushed into the room. The girl, Maya couldn't have been more than 19, lay on the bed, her face gray with pain and fear. Blood stained the sheets. Leora had seen death enough times to recognize its approach. Hey, she said softly, moving to Maya's side. I'm here. You're going to be okay. The baby. We're going to get your baby out safely, but I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? Maya nodded, tears streaming. Leora looked at Mrs. Kellen. Get me clean cloths, boiled water, and find someone who's delivered breech babies before. Now. The next hour was brutal. They found an older refugee woman who'd been a midwife in her settlement. Together, they worked to turn the baby, stop the bleeding, keep Maya conscious and fighting. Leora had never felt more out of her depth. Every decision felt like a guess. Every moment brought the possibility of catastrophic failure. But they kept working. And finally, a baby's cry filled the room. A boy. Small, angry, very much alive. Maya sobbed with relief. The midwife wrapped the baby and placed him in his mother's arms. Leora sank into a chair, shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Her own baby kicked forcefully, as if protesting the stress. You did good, Mrs. Kellen said quietly. I had no idea what I was doing. None of us ever do. We just do it anyway. Calder found her an hour later, still sitting in the chair, watching Maya sleep with her baby tucked against her chest. I heard what happened. News travels. You saved them, both of them. The midwife saved them. I just helped. He pulled up another chair and sat beside her. You're exhausted. I'm pregnant and running a refugee operation. Exhausted is my default state. You should rest. I will, soon. She looked at him. We're going to have one of those. Soon. A baby. Who's going to cry and need things and completely upend whatever fragile order we've managed to create? I know. Are you ready? Absolutely not. You? Not even slightly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sleeping mother and child, contemplating the future rushing toward them like a storm. Calder? Yes? Thank you. For what? For not firing me that first day. For letting me challenge you. For choosing to grow instead of staying rigid. For, her voice caught, for being brave enough to change. He took her hand, linking their fingers together. I didn't have a choice. You walked in and broke everything open. I could either adapt or shatter. You could have sent me away. That was never actually an option. From the moment you criticized my muddy boots, I think I knew. Knew what? That you were going to ruin my carefully controlled life, and I was going to let you. He smiled. Best decision I never consciously made. She laughed, squeezing his hand. We're going to be terrible parents. Undoubtedly. Our child is going to grow up in chaos. Probably. And we're going to make so many mistakes. Definitely. But we'll do it together. Always. Her water broke 3 days later. The labor was long and difficult. Leora had helped Maya through childbirth, but experiencing it herself was entirely different. Pain that obliterated thought, exhaustion that felt endless, fear that something would go wrong. Calder stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, letting her curse at him, looking more terrified than she'd ever seen him. I can't do this, she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. You can. You're the bravest person I know. I'm not brave. I'm stubborn. There's a difference. Same result. I hate you. I know. Keep breathing. Don't tell me to breathe. I know how to breathe. Then do it. She wanted to hit him, but the contraction passed and she just gripped his hand harder. 20 hours after it began, their daughter was born. Small, red-faced, screaming with impressive lung capacity. Perfect. The midwife placed her in Leora's arms, and the world narrowed to that tiny, furious face. She's here, Leora whispered, wonder cutting through the exhaustion. Calder leaned over them, his expression raw with emotion. She's beautiful. She looks like an angry potato. The most beautiful angry potato I've ever seen. Their daughter opened her eyes, winter steel gray like her father's, and seemed to study them with intense focus. She's judging us already, Calder said. Smart baby. Takes after her mother. Poor thing. He kissed Leora's forehead, then gently touched their daughter's tiny hand. She grabbed his finger with surprising strength. What do we call her? Calder asked. Leora had been thinking about names for months, traditional names, family names, names with history and weight. But looking at her daughter's fierce little face, only one felt right. Hope, she said quietly. We call her Hope. Calder's eyes widened. Then he smiled, full, genuine, the kind of smile that had become more common but still surprised her with its warmth. Hope Ashbourne, I like it. It's not very traditional. Nothing about us is traditional. Fair point. They sat together in the quiet room, holding their daughter, marveling at the tiny human they'd created through equal parts love and absolute chaos. Outside, the household had gathered, waiting for news. When Mrs. Kellen finally emerged to announce the birth, cheers erupted, loud, joyful, completely inappropriate for a traditional noble household, exactly right for Ashbourne Manor. The first month with Hope was brutal. She cried constantly, slept unpredictably, and had opinions about everything despite being unable to express them except through volume. Calder was terrified and devoted in equal measure. He held her like she might break, talked to her in soft, uncertain tones, and looked genuinely shocked every time she fell asleep in his arms. "I'm terrible at this," he said one night, pacing the bedroom with a crying Hope. "You're doing fine." She won't stop crying. Babies cry. It's their primary communication method. What if something's wrong? Then we'll fix it, but right now she's just being a baby. Let her complain. He looked at their daughter's red, furious face. She's very good at complaining. Takes after both of us. Despite the exhaustion and constant demands, something had shifted in Calder. The rigid control he'd clung to for so long had finally, fully broken down. He existed in chaos now, constant disruption, unpredictable needs, zero control over his schedule or sleep or anything else. And he was okay. More than okay, actually. He was happy. Leora watched him with hope one afternoon, saw him making ridiculous faces to make her smile, and felt her heart do that complicated thing it always did around him. "I love you," she said. He looked up, surprised. "What brought that on?" "Watching you be a father. You're good at it." "I'm exhausted and confused and completely out of my depth." "Yes, and you're doing it anyway. That's what makes you good at it." He came over and kissed her, careful not to wake the baby dozing in his arms. "I love you too. Even though you ruined my life, I improved your life." Same thing. Not even close. But they were both smiling. Spring came again, bringing with it news from the capital. Lord Pembroke had pushed through formal reforms to the provincial charter. Humanitarian assistance was now explicitly protected. Estates could offer shelter without prior approval. The bureaucratic barriers that had nearly destroyed them were gone. "They're calling it the Ashbourne Provision," Calder said, reading the official notice. "Our case set the precedent." Leora, feeding hope, looked up. "So we changed the system. Apparently, though knowing you, this won't be enough. You'll want more reforms." "Obviously, but this is a start. A significant start. Don't get comfortable. We have work to do." He laughed. "I haven't been comfortable since you walked into my library. I'm not starting now." The neighboring lords who'd tried to seize the estate had been censured by the council. Two had resigned their positions rather than face formal investigation. Lord Harrington, Leora's father's co-conspirator, had been stripped of his administrative privileges entirely. Justice. Imperfect and slow, but real. "Your father sent a letter," Calder said carefully. "It arrived this morning." Leora's expression closed. "What does it say?" "I didn't read it. It's addressed to you." She set down Hope and took the letter, stared at it for a long moment. Then she threw it in the fire without opening it. "Not interested?" "He made his choice when he tried to use council corruption to steal your estate. I made mine when I married you. We're done. You might regret not reading it." "I might, but I'd regret giving him space in my life more." She picked up Hope again. "This is my family now. You. Hope. The chaotic household we've built. That's what matters." Calder moved to sit beside her on the couch. "No second thoughts about the life you left behind?" "Not a single one. That life was suffocating. This one is hard and messy and constantly challenging, but it's real. I'll take real over comfortable any day. Even when real means exhaustion and screaming babies and political battles. Especially then." Hope chose that moment to spit up all over Leora's dress. "Perfect timing," Leora muttered, grabbing a cloth. Calder laughed, genuine, unguarded, the kind of laugh that had become more common in recent months. "Welcome to real," he said. "I hate real sometimes, but you love it more." "Annoyingly, yes." Tab. 5 years later, Hope was running through the courtyard chasing chickens while Leora supervised from a bench, pregnant again with their second child. The estate had become exactly what they'd envisioned, a genuine shelter network, formally chartered and officially protected. They housed an average of 30 people at any given time. Some stayed weeks, some stayed months. A few stayed permanently, becoming part of the household. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the estate was completely gone. In its place was organized chaos, everyone contributing, everyone valued, structure maintained through cooperation rather than fear. Other estates had started copying the model. The Ashbourne provision had opened doors across the frontier. Humanitarian work was no longer scandal. It was becoming expectation. "Mama!" Hope ran up, her dress covered in mud, her hair wild. "The chickens won't cooperate." Chickens rarely do. "Why are you chasing them?" "Because it's fun." She ran off again before Leora could respond. Calder emerged from the manor, carrying correspondence. "Lord Thorne sent word. He's expanding his shelter program. Wants to coordinate with ours." "Good. The more estates involved, the better coverage." He's also suggesting a formal frontier coalition, estates working together to manage crisis response. That's ambitious. He learned from the best. Leora smiled. "We did start something, didn't we?" "You started it. I just stopped being too rigid to see the value." "Team effort." He sat beside her, watching Hope terrorize the chickens with the single-minded determination she'd inherited from both parents. "She's going to be trouble," he said. "Undoubtedly. Takes after her mother. And her father. Don't forget the stubborn rigidity she displays about bedtime. That's called having principles. That's called being impossible." But she was smiling when she said it. Calder's hand found hers, linking their fingers together in the gesture that had become automatic over 5 years of marriage. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Leora thought about the girl who'd walked into this estate disguised as a servant, running from a life that was slowly suffocating her. Thought about the rigid Duke who'd almost fired her for criticizing his muddy boots. Thought about everything they'd fought through: political attacks, winter storms, raids, investigations, childbirth, constant chaos. "Not a single one," she said. "You? Only that I didn't hire you sooner. You would have fired me immediately if we'd met any earlier. You weren't ready. Fair point, I needed braking first, and I needed somewhere to land after jumping. So we were both disasters waiting to collide." Beautifully phrased. He pulled her closer, careful of her pregnant belly. "I love you. Still. More every day somehow. That's very romantic for someone who used to communicate primarily in stern silences. You've been a terrible influence. The best kind." Hope ran past again, now being chased by an indignant rooster. "Should we intervene?" Calder asked. "Probably. But I want to see how this plays out first." "That's terrible parenting." "She'll learn. Or get pecked." "Also learning." He laughed and stood to rescue their daughter from poultry-based consequences. Leora watched him scoop up Hope, who shrieked with delight and immediately started explaining in rapid detail why the chickens were being unreasonable. This was her life now. Chaotic, loud, unpredictable, everything she'd never planned and exactly what she'd needed. The frontier stretched endlessly around them, harsh, unforgiving, brutally honest. But here, in this estate that had once been a fortress of silence, they'd built something that felt like home. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, and worth every fight. Mrs. Kellen appeared on the steps. "Duchess, there's a family at the gate. 6 people. Fire destroyed their homestead 3 days east. They're asking for shelter." Leora stood, awkward, pregnant, tired, and smiled. "Send them to the guest wing. Make sure they have food and warm beds. I'll speak with them after dinner." "Of course, my lady. Business as usual." Help offered, safety provided. Community built one desperate family at a time. Calder returned with Hope, who'd negotiated a truce with the rooster through the diplomatic method of offering breadcrumbs. "More refugees?" he asked, seeing Leora's expression. 6 people. Fire. We have space in the West Wing." "I know. Mrs. Kellen's handling it." He studied her face. "You're happy." "I'm exhausted and pregnant and about to spend dinner listening to another family's tragedy. But yes, I'm happy." "Why?" "Because we're helping. Because it matters. Because 5 years ago this estate was a tomb, and now it's alive." She took his free hand, the one not holding Hope. "Because you took a chance on an impertinent housemaid, and everything changed." "Best muddy boots I ever wore." "You're never letting that go, are you?" "Never. It's our origin story." Hope wiggled to get down. "Mama, Papa, can we have chicken for dinner?" "Not the chickens you were chasing," Calder said firmly. Why not? Because they're pets now, apparently. I didn't say they were pets. You named them. That makes them pets. I named them so I could tell them apart when I chased them. Leora and Calder exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication they'd developed over 5 years of parenting together. Their daughter was definitely going to be trouble, but she was theirs, the product of two impossible people who'd somehow made it work through sheer stubborn determination and absolute refusal to give up on each other. They walked toward the manor together, a small family unit moving through controlled chaos toward dinner and another evening of crisis management and impossible logistics. Above them, the frontier sky stretched vast and clear. No clouds, no storms, just endless possibility. The kind of sky that promised nothing except whatever you were brave enough to build beneath it. And Leora, walking hand in hand with the man who'd once valued silence above all else, carrying his second child while their first daughter chattered about chicken politics, felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. The frontier didn't do peace, but certainty, purpose. The bone-deep knowledge that this was exactly where she belonged. Leora, Calder said as they reached the manor steps. Yes? Thank you. For what? For refusing to bow that first day? For criticizing my carpet care? For being brave enough to stay when everyone else would have run? For breaking everything open? He stopped, turning to face her fully. For choosing me. Choosing this. Even when it was hard. She stood on her toes, difficult with the pregnancy, and kissed him. Quick, warm, full of 5 years of accumulated love. Always, she said simply, in the chaos and the quiet, in the fights and the peace, always. Hope tugged at their hands. Can we go inside now? I'm hungry and the chickens are giving me looks. The chickens are not giving you looks, Calder said. They are. They're plotting revenge for the chasing. Then perhaps you shouldn't have chased them. But that's the whole point. Chase, get revenge, chase again. It's a cycle. Leora laughed, full and genuine, and pulled her impossible family inside. Behind them, the frontier evening settled over Ashbourne Manor. The refugees in the guest wing found warmth and food. The household staff moved through familiar routines. The chickens, vindicated, returned to their coop victorious. And in the master bedroom that night, after Hope was finally asleep and the household had settled into quiet, Calder pulled Leora close and whispered, I would do it all again. Every fight, every crisis, every moment of chaos, just to end up here. With a pregnant wife and an impossible daughter and a manor full of strangers. With a partner who makes me better, a family that makes me happy, a life that actually means something. She kissed him in the darkness, pouring everything she felt into it, love and gratitude and absolute certainty that they'd built something worth keeping. Me too, she whispered against his lips. Every single moment, I'd do it all again. And in the harsh frontier night, in a manor that had once been a fortress of silence, two people who'd found each other through absolute chaos fell asleep wrapped around each other. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, and chosen, and worth every fight, exactly as it should be.